Eleanor Whitmore did not cry when they threw her father's ledger into the mud. She knelt in the middle of Red Valley's Main Street, both knees pressing into the dirt, fingers shaking as she scraped the wet pages from the ground, while laughter rang above her head like church bells gone wrong. 3 years of silence had taught her how to swallow humiliation whole. But her hands were trembling in a way she could not stop. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button right now and follow Eleanor's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The summer of 1885 came to Red Valley, Colorado, like a punishment. The heat pressed down on everything, on the cracked clay streets, on the faded storefronts, on the livestock standing motionless in their pens. It pressed down on Eleanor Whitmore most of all. She had been awake since 4 in the morning, not because the heat had chased away sleep, though it had done that too, but because the store would not run itself, and there was nobody left to help her run it. Her father, Gerald Whitmore, had died 11 months ago in the grip of a fever that took him faster than anyone expected. He had left her the store and the small parcel of land behind it, a handwritten will, a stack of debts she was still climbing, and a name that carried no weight in a town that had already decided what she was worth. What she was worth, according to Red Valley, was very little. Eleanor was 24 years old. She had her mother's round face and her father's brown eyes, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet dignity that comes from years of practice, from learning how to walk into a room and take up space without flinching, even when every eye in that room found her body before it found her face. She was a large woman. She had always been a large woman. The town had never once let her forget it. She tied her apron behind her back that morning, the same faded canvas apron she wore every day, and she opened the front door of Whitmore General Goods before the sun had fully cleared the ridge. The wooden sign above the door needed repainting. The hinges needed oil. The front porch step had a crack running through it that she had been meaning to fix for 6 weeks. She noted all of these things with the precise, exhausted eye of a woman who had learned to see only what needed doing and never what she needed herself. The first customer of the morning was Mrs. Caldwell, who came in for flour and cornmeal and spent 4 minutes inspecting the fabric bolts near the window before asking Eleanor, without turning around, whether she'd heard that the Presley girl had gotten herself engaged. "No, ma'am," Eleanor said. "I hadn't heard." "Sweet girl," Mrs. Caldwell said. "Very trim figure. Her mother always kept her active." She finally found Eleanor behind the counter and let her gaze travel the full length of her, the way people examined produce at market assessing, measuring, finding it wanting. "You really ought to take walks in the evening, Eleanor. The air does wonders." Eleanor placed the flour on the counter. "Will there be anything else, Mrs. Caldwell?" There was not. There rarely was. The women of Red Valley either ignored Eleanor entirely or gave her advice she hadn't asked for, and they delivered that advice in the gentle, pitying voice people use when they believe they are being kind. She had stopped flinching at it 2 years ago. She had stopped expecting anything different roughly 6 months after that. She went through the morning, the way she went through all mornings, methodically, steadily, the way water finds its level. She inventoried the back shelves. She wrote 3 letters to suppliers in Denver. She fixed the hinge on the storeroom door with a screwdriver and a strip of leather she cut herself. She swept the porch and noted again the cracked step and told herself she would deal with it on Sunday. At 10:30, the door opened and Victor Hayes walked in. Eleanor did not stop moving. She kept her hands busy with the manifest on the counter in front of her, kept her eyes on the numbers, kept her face arranged in the expression she had perfected over the past 3 years, the one that said nothing at all. Victor was 31 years old and handsome in the way that certain men are handsome when they are young and have never been told no for very long. He had dark blonde hair and a wide smile and boots that were always freshly polished, and he had been for a period of 8 months 3 years ago, Eleanor's intended. She still was not certain how that had happened. She had been 21 grieving her mother, and Victor had come into the store with that wide smile and told her she was pretty in a way that startled her so completely she had not known what to say. He had courted her for 4 months. He had spoken to her father. He had made promises in a low voice one evening on the porch that she had believed because she had wanted very badly to believe them. Then something had shifted. She could not name exactly when it happened. It was like watching weather change slow at first, then sudden and total. The compliments stopped. The visits became shorter. And then one Sunday, standing in front of the church with half the town watching, Victor had laughed at a joke she had not heard and turned to his friend beside him and said loudly enough for Eleanor to hear clearly, "What was I thinking? A man's got to have some standards." She had walked home alone. She had not cried until she was inside with the door closed. And she had not spoken of it to anyone, not because there was no one to speak to, but because she had already understood somewhere in the part of herself that had always known this town too well that no one would be particularly surprised. Victor had married a woman named Clara Poole 14 months ago. Clara was slender and laughed at all of Victor's jokes, and Victor had grown, if anything, more comfortable in the 3 years since the broken engagement. More comfortable and more careless with the comfort. "Eleanor," he said now in the voice he always used with her, cordial, amused, with a particular edge beneath it, like a blade wrapped in linen. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "what can I get for you? Just passing through." He leaned against the counter with his elbow, picked up the small brass weight she used for the scale, tossed it once in his palm. "Saw you sweeping out front this morning. Looking well." She waited. "Clara's sister is coming down from Denver next month," he said. "Pretty girl. We were thinking of introducing her to Dale Mercer." He set the brass weight down in the wrong place. "You remember Dale? He used to come around here some." "I remember him," Eleanor said. "Good man, working the McCready Ranch now." Victor smiled. "Some men just need to find the right woman, don't they? A woman who suits them." The smile stayed exactly where it was. "You're still here alone, I take it." Eleanor picked up the brass weight and put it back where it belonged. "Was there something I could help you find today, Mr. Hayes?" Victor's smile shifted just slightly, just enough to show something beneath it that was less pleasant than the surface. "You know, my daddy used to say that some women just weren't made for marriage. Said they were put here for other purposes. Useful purposes." He glanced around the store. "I suppose this suits you well enough." "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," Eleanor said, flat and final. He left. But the bell above the door had not finished ringing before she heard him speaking to someone on the porch, lowering his voice just enough to make it clear he didn't much care whether she could hear him. "Poor thing," he said. "Gerald was a good man. Shame what he left behind." The other voice laughed. Eleanor went back to her manifest. She pressed the pen against the paper harder than was necessary and made herself breathe slowly and counted the numbers twice because she had lost her place, and she did not allow herself to feel anything about this because feeling things about it did not help and had never helped and would not start helping now. She had other things to think about. The debt, for instance. Her father had borrowed money from the county land office 18 months before he died. A larger sum than Eleanor had realized because Gerald Whitmore had been a proud man who kept his worries to himself. She had discovered it 3 weeks after the funeral, going through his papers at the roll-top desk in the back room, and the discovery had sat on her chest like a stone ever since. The amount was manageable barely if the store turned a consistent profit through the summer and fall. But the store had not turned a consistent profit since spring. Orders had dropped. Accounts she'd expected had gone quiet. 2 families who had traded with Whitmore General Goods for over a decade had in the past 3 months taken their business to Dalton Supply on the far end of town, a newer store run by a man named Gordon Dalton, who had arrived from Kansas 2 years ago with capital and connections and a clean-shaved smile. Eleanor could not prove that anything improper was happening. She could only look at the numbers and feel the ground shifting. She was still looking at the numbers when at 20 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, the door opened again. She heard the boots first. There was something particular about the sound of them. Not the slap of townsmen's shoes or the shuffle of farmers' work boots, but the steady, deliberate heel strike of a man who had covered a great deal of ground and intended to cover more. She looked up. How was tall? Not exceptionally so, but tall in the way that men are when they have spent years outdoors, when the body has been asked to do real work and has answered. He wore a dark coat despite the heat trail dusty at the hem and a hat that had seen serious weather. His hair was dark brown, cut short, and he had a short beard that was just beginning to show threads of gray at the edges. His eyes, when they found her behind the counter, were a particular shade between blue and gray, the color of sky before a storm makes up its mind. I was probably 38. He had the kind of face that suggested he had seen things that cost him something and had paid the price without complaint. He stopped in front of the counter. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. "I'm looking to resupply, traveling through." "Of course," Eleanor said. "What do you need?" He reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper, a list written in a plain, precise hand. He laid it on the counter without sliding it toward her, which meant she had to reach for it, which she did, and she read through it quickly. Coffee salt, dried beans, hardtack rope, 2 boxes of ammunition, a new canteen, a roll of bandaging. "I can have most of this ready within the half hour," she said. "The bandaging and the canteen I've got right now. The ammunition will take me a minute to find the right caliber." "No hurry," he said. "I appreciate it." He did not leave the counter the way most men did, drifting toward the door or finding something to lean against. He simply stood at a comfortable distance and waited. He was not examining her. He was not doing the thing that men sometimes did, the slow measuring look that she had learned to recognize and brace against. He was simply present. Standing in her store with the patience of a man who had learned that waiting was not a weakness, she brought the canteen and the bandaging roll to the counter. "You looking for somewhere to stable your horse?" "Already took care of it," he said. "The livery on Crane Street." "Morrow's?" She nodded. "He's fair, won't overcharge you." "That was my sense," he said. "You know this town well." "Grew up here," she said. "My father ran this store before me." Something moved across his face, not pity, which she was practiced at spotting. Something quieter. Acknowledgement, maybe. Recognition of a weight. "That's a heavy thing to carry alone," he said. "I manage," she said. Not defensively, just as a statement of fact, because it was. "I can see that," he said. And he said it the way he said everything else, like he meant it. Not like a compliment, not like something he was deploying to get a better price. Like a simple observation. She was still processing this, the straightforwardness of it, the absence of any subtext she needed to decode when the door opened for the 3rd time that afternoon and changed everything. There were 4 of them. She recognized 2 on sight. Carl Briggs, who ran the feedlot, and his younger brother Pete, who ran errands for anyone who'd pay him. The other 2 she placed after a moment. Men who worked the land on the eastern edge of the county rough men. The kind who found each day's work in whatever was available and spent their evenings at the saloon, reconsidering the choices that had brought them here. Carl Briggs had a piece of paper in his hand. He came straight to the counter, bypassing the stranger without looking at him, and laid the paper down in front of Eleanor with the flat, deliberate certainty of a man who has rehearsed this moment. "Notice of debt collection," he said, "from the Red Valley County Land Office. I'm authorized to serve it." Eleanor's hands went still on the counter. "You're not with the land office," she said. "I work for men who do business with them," he said. "Same thing." His eyes were flat, satisfied. "You've got 60 days to produce payment in full, Eleanor, or the land parcel behind this store gets seized. The store itself follows after." "That notice was issued 3 months ago," she said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised at how steady it was. "The land office extended my payment period. I have documentation." "Did they?" Briggs leaned on the counter. "Funny thing. I spoke to Mr. Dalton this morning, Gordon Dalton, who, as it happens now, holds a contract with the land office for collecting outstanding accounts. And Mr. Dalton says your extension was filed incorrectly, which means it ain't valid." The room had the particular quality of held breath. Eleanor looked at this paper. She did not reach for it immediately. She was thinking fast, clean, the kind of thinking that happens in the space between heartbeats when a person realizes the trap has been in place longer than they understood. Gordon Dalton. The new store. The accounts that had gone quiet. The orders that had dropped. "You tell Mr. Dalton," she said slowly, That I will be at the land office first thing Monday morning with my documentation, my father's original contract, and my own legal correspondence. And I will be at the county seat the morning after that if I find that anything has been improperly filed." Briggs smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "You do that," he said. "See how far a fat woman with a failing store gets in this county." The word landed in this room the way a stone lands in still water, with a sound and then a spreading silence. Pete Briggs made a sound that might have been a laugh. The two men behind him shifted their weight. Eleanor did not move. She held Carl Briggs's eyes, and she did not look away, though every instinct in her body was urging her toward the familiar retreat, the familiar silence, the way of surviving this town that she had perfected over years of practice. Endure it, outlast it, go home, and don't cry until the door is closed. "I think," said a voice behind the Briggs brothers, "that this conversation is finished." It was quiet. It was entirely, completely quiet, and it carried in it the particular quality of stillness that precedes something irrevocable. The stranger had not moved from where he stood. He had not raised his voice. He had not reached for anything. He stood with his hands at his sides and his eyes on Carl Briggs, and there was something in the way he stood, in the absolute measured absence of urgency, that made the room feel different. Carl turned, looked the stranger over, made the calculation that large men make quickly when they encounter other large men. "This is none of your business," Carl said. "I'm in the store," the stranger said, "which makes it my business by proximity at least." He took a single step forward, not threatening, deliberate. "The lady told you she has documentation. That seems like the end of it to me." "The lady," Carl said, and there was something ugly in the way he stressed the word, "is 2 months from losing everything her daddy left her, and she can't afford a lawyer, and she don't have a husband to speak for her, and this county don't much care what she has to say about anything. That's the reality of it." "That may be the reality you're counting on," the stranger said, "but I'd be careful about counting on it too hard. Fraud cases have a way of going sideways when there's documentation and a witness." Carl Briggs looked at him for a long moment. Something in that look shifted, not retreat, not quite, but recalibration. "You passing through," he said. "Haven't decided yet," the stranger said. Carl picked his paper up from the counter. He folded it once slowly and tucked it into his vest. He looked at Eleanor once more, a look that was not anger, but was not quite done either, and then he turned and walked out with his brother and the two men behind him. The bell above the door rang. The room breathed again. Eleanor became aware all at once of the pressure she had been holding in her chest. Not fear exactly, but its close relation. The body's awareness of its own smallness in the face of something that intends to diminish it further. She let one slow breath out. "Thank you," she said. She did not look up immediately because she needed another moment before she could do it without the wrong thing showing in her face. "They've done that before," the stranger said. It was not a question. "Not like that," she said, "but something like it." She looked up then. He was watching her with that same quality of attention, not pity, not rescue, instinct, not the look of a man deciding how much trouble something is worth. Just attention. "That was the first time they came into the store." "Then they're escalating," he said. "Yes," she said. "I know." A pause. He seemed to be deciding something, though his face gave very little away. "My name is Caleb Walker," he said. "I've been through enough counties to know how this particular game is played. If you're interested in hearing what I've seen work against it, I'd be willing to talk." Eleanor looked at him. She had been looked at her whole life, assessed, measured, dismissed. She had learned to look back in the same spirit, and what she saw when she looked at Caleb Walker was this: a man who was not performing anything. No charm deployed for purpose. No calculation running behind his eyes. Just a man who had said what he meant and was waiting to see what she would do with it. "I don't accept charity," she said. "Wasn't offering any," he said. "I was offering a conversation." She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she nodded toward the back of the store, where there was a small table she used for keeping the books. "I'll finish your order first," she said. "Then we'll talk." He nodded. "Take your time, Miss Whitmore." She had not told him her name. She filed that away without comment, gathered herself, and went to find the ammunition. By the time she had the full order assembled, she had also assembled something else. The beginning of a question she couldn't quite form yet, but could feel the shape of like a word on the edge of a tongue. Caleb Walker had ridden into Red Valley on a summer afternoon and walked into her store and stood between her and Carl Briggs without being asked and without wanting anything visible in return. That kind of man was rare. In her experience, that kind of man was rarer than a cool day in August. She set the last item on the counter and looked up. "So," she said, "tell me what you know about Gordon Dalton." He looked at her steadily, and then for the first time since he'd walked through her door, Caleb Walker almost smiled. "Quite a bit as it happens," he said. "The name follows him." "Follows him from where?" "Douglas County," he said. 2 years before that from a town called Pemberton in Wyoming Territory. Same pattern every time. New town, new contracts with the land office, accounts start going quiet for the small operations. Debt notices get served by men who work for him but don't announce it. By the time anyone can prove a connection, the properties have changed hands, and Dalton's moved on richer than he arrived. The world went very quiet around Eleanor. Not the quiet of shock. The quiet of recognition. She had known something was wrong. She had known it in the numbers in the accounts going silent, in the particular way Gordon Dalton had introduced himself to her that first month, so pleasant, so earnest, so warmly unconcerned with competition from a woman running a store alone. She had known it. She had simply not known how to name it. "He went after you specifically," Caleb continued. He was reading her face, not invasively, just carefully, the way a person reads terrain. "That debt notice isn't accidental. Your land parcel is the key piece. Whatever's behind this store, whoever wants it, it goes through that parcel first." "There's a water source," Eleanor said. The words came out flat, stripped of everything except fact. "A spring, on the back of my father's land. Gerald always said it was the best water in the valley. He never made a public thing of it because he didn't want the trouble, but people knew." "People like Dalton," Caleb said. "Apparently." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Who are you, Mr. Walker? Where do you come from?" He was quiet too for a moment. Not evasive quiet. Considering quiet. "I spent 12 years writing border protection for the Federal Land Commission," he said. "Before that, I ranched my father's place up in Montana until the bank took it while I was away on commission. I know what it looks like when the law is being used against the people it's meant to protect." He paused. "I came through Red Valley because I'm heading west. I have no particular reason to stay." The implication was not stated. It sat in the air between them, plain and unhurried. "I can't pay you," Eleanor said, bluntly, because she was past the point of softening anything. "I don't remember asking to be paid," he said. "I asked to have a conversation." "Why?" she said. And she meant it as a real question, not suspicious, not deflecting, but genuinely asking, because she was a woman who had learned the hard way that kindness from strangers was generally either pity or prelude to something else, and she wanted to know which this was. Caleb Walker looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was unchanged, low, even without decoration. "Because I've walked into a lot of towns," he said, "and I've watched a lot of people get run off their land by men with money and connections, and the kind of friends that sit on county boards. And most of the time, I ride on. Because most of the time there's nothing to be done." He met her eyes without flinching. "But now and then, there's someone who isn't beaten yet. Someone who's still standing at the counter doing the work even when the ground is moving under them. And those people—" He stopped. "Then, those people deserve better than what they usually get." Eleanor looked at him. She had been looked at her whole life. She was not accustomed to being seen. The difference she was discovering was considerable. "The land office opens Monday," she said. "I intend to be there when it does." "Then I'll be there too," Caleb said, simply. The way a man says something when it is simply true. She held his gaze for one more moment, measuring him with everything she had learned in 24 years of reading people who rarely meant what they said, and she found with a clarity that surprised her that she believed him. She had not believed a man's word in a long time. She reached across the counter and extended her hand. Eleanor Whitmore, she said. He took her hand and shook it once firm, direct. Not the apologetic, tentative handshake that some men offered women as though afraid of causing offense by treating them like a person. A real handshake, an equal one. Caleb Walker, he said. Outside, the summer afternoon pressed on. The heat was still brutal. The sign above the door still needed painting. The step still had its crack. But something had shifted in the room, some arrangement of weight and possibility. And Eleanor Whitmore, who had spent 3 years of silence learning to carry everything alone, was aware for the first time in a very long time that she was not the only person standing in it. She took a breath, picked up her pen. "Now," she said, "let me show you what I've already found in my father's papers. Because I don't think you're the only one who knows Gordon Dalton's name." Caleb Walker pulled out the chair across from her and sat down without ceremony. And the work began. The papers Eleanor spread across the back table told a story that made Caleb Walker go very still. He did not reach for them immediately. He let her lay them out in the order she had organized them, and that order itself told him something. She hadn't thrown these together in a panic. She had sorted them by date, by sender, by type. She had handwritten notes on small cards tucked between the pages, cross-referencing figures from her father's ledger against dates on the official correspondence. This was the work of a woman who had been paying attention long before anyone came into her store with a debt notice. "Your father knew something was coming," Caleb said. "I think he suspected," Eleanor said. "He didn't tell me directly. He wasn't the kind of man who said hard things out loud." She touched the edge of one letter, a thin yellowed envelope from the county land office, postmarked 14 months before Gerald Whitmore's death. But he started keeping records of everything. Every payment, every communication. He made 2 copies of every receipt and stored them in different places. Smart man. How was? She said it quietly, and there was something in her voice that wasn't grief anymore, something harder and cleaner. Purpose, maybe. The kind that comes when loss gets channeled into something that can be used. He didn't trust the land office the last year of his life. I know that now. I just didn't know why. Caleb reached for the first document she'd laid out, the original deed for the land parcel behind the store. He read it carefully without rushing. Eleanor waited. She had offered him coffee, and he'd accepted, and she had made it strong the way she always did, and they sat at the back table with the noise of the street, distant and filtered, and the late afternoon heat sitting on the roof above them while he read. "There's a rider on this deed," he said. "3rd page," she said. "2nd paragraph. The water rights are attached specifically to the property in my father's name and his legal heirs. They cannot be sold, transferred, or absorbed separately. They only transfer with the whole land. Which means if Dalton acquires the land through a debt seizure, he gets the water rights with it," Eleanor said. "Without ever having to negotiate them separately, without ever having to admit that's what he wanted in the first place." She folded her hands on the table. "I found a survey document in the storeroom last winter. Someone had conducted a new water assessment of the valley. I didn't commission it. My father didn't commission it. I've never been able to find out who did." Caleb set the deed down and looked at her directly. "When was the survey dated?" 4 months before Gordon Dalton arrived in Red Valley," she said. The silence between them had the particular quality of 2 people who have just confirmed something they already knew but needed to hear out loud. "He came here for the water," Caleb said. "He came here for the water," Eleanor agreed. "Everything else, the store competition, the accounts going quiet, the debt notice, that's all just engineering. He's building a path to that spring, and he's been building it since before he introduced himself to me with that smile and his hand out." She paused. "I shook it. Told him welcome to Red Valley. I even sent business his way that first month because I thought competition was fair and I wasn't afraid of it." "You couldn't have known," Caleb said. "No," she said. "But I should have looked harder at the numbers when they started slipping. I told myself it was summer slowdown. I told myself people had reasons." Her jaw tightened slightly. "I didn't want to believe someone was deliberately—" She stopped. Began again. "It's easier to blame your own shortcomings than to believe someone is coming at you with a plan." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, "What's your current outstanding debt to the land office?" She told him the figure. He didn't react to it. No wince, no sharp intake of breath. He simply nodded and wrote it on the corner of a scrap of paper she'd set aside. "And the extension you filed, what was the original date of that?" She pulled the relevant letter from the stack. He read it twice. "This is properly filed," he said. "The county seal, the signature, the filing date, everything in order." "Which is why I don't understand how Dalton is claiming it's invalid," she said. Unless someone in the land office is working with him," Caleb said. Flat plain, the way a man says something he has seen before and has no illusions about. It wouldn't be the first time. A man with Dalton's history doesn't operate on charm alone. He needs someone on the inside, someone with authority over the filing records, someone who can make paperwork disappear or appear to have been filed incorrectly. Eleanor looked at this letter in his hand. She thought about the clerk at the land office, a thin, nervous young man named Harold Peck, who had always been perfectly professional in her dealings with him. She thought about the county commissioner, Edmund Rourke, who she had met twice, and who had seemed both times like a man preoccupied with his own importance, and not especially interested in anything that didn't increase it. "Commissioner Rourke," she said. Caleb looked at her, waited. "He's been over to Dalton's store 4 times in the past 2 months, she said. "I noticed because his office is 2 doors down from here, and I pay attention to who walks where. I didn't think anything of it at the time. Now I do." Caleb set the letter down. He leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, in the way of a man rearranging things in his head. "Here's what you have," he said. "You have an original deed with intact water rights. You have a properly filed extension with the county seal. You have a pattern of business interference that can be documented with your ledger records. And you have the beginnings of a connection between Dalton and the county commissioner." "What I don't have," Eleanor said, "is anyone in this town who will say any of this out loud in front of a judge." "Not yet," he said. Those 2 words sat between them, and Eleanor let herself feel the weight of them. The measured, qualified "not yet" of a man who was not making promises, but was not abandoning the field either. Why does a man with 12 years in federal land commission ride through a town like Red Valley and notice all of this in an afternoon? She asked. Not suspiciously, genuinely. He met her eyes. "Because I came from a town like Red Valley," he said. "A different name, different state, same arrangement. My father spent 40 years on a ranch in Montana that the bank took in 60 days while I was away on assignment. Legal, clean, every paper in order." He paused. The pause had weight in it, not bitterness, but the particular heaviness of something that has been carried a long time and has become familiar. "He died 6 months later, on my brother's couch. A man who'd built something with his hands for 40 years died on someone else's couch because someone with the right connections decided they wanted his water rights." The room was very quiet. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, not reflexively, with full meaning. "I don't tell it for sympathy," he said. "I tell it because you asked me why I notice. That's why. I notice because I've seen what happens when nobody does." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. She was good at reading people, had become good at it by necessity, by years of needing to understand what people meant beneath what they said. She read Caleb Walker and found nothing performed in him. The grief was real and old, and he wore it the way a man wears a scar, not displayed, not hidden, just present. "All right," she said. She gathered the papers and began reorganizing them with brisk, purposeful hands. "Monday morning land office. I go with my documentation. You come as a witness, and someone who can speak to the legal standards of proper filing." "That's workable," he said. "Between now and then, I need to understand exactly what Dalton has filed and when. Which means I need someone to look at the office records." She glanced up. "The clerk, Harold Peck. Do you know anything about reading a man quickly?" "Well enough," Caleb said. "He's scared of something," Eleanor said. "He has been for months. Every time I go in there, he finds a reason to look away from me. I thought it was because he felt sorry for me, the widow's daughter, and all of that." She paused. "But now I think he knows something he hasn't been able to say." "Then we need to give him a reason to say it," Caleb said, "or make him understand that the reason he's scared is going to be a lot worse if he keeps quiet," Eleanor said. She said it without venom, but without softness. She was simply calculating. The way she calculated inventory and accounts and the cost of everything against what was available to pay for it. Caleb looked at her steadily. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically. Something quiet, like the adjustment of light when a cloud passes. "You've been managing this alone for 11 months, he said. "Yes," she said. "That's a long time." "It is," she agreed. "Most people would have—" He stopped. "Sold," she said. Walked away. She set the papers down. "This store was my father's life. This land is where I grew up. And there is a spring on that parcel that my father built a fence around and kept clean, and used to say was the only thing in Red Valley that couldn't be argued with." She looked at Caleb Walker, and there was something in her face that had not been there at the beginning of the afternoon, not harder exactly, but more visible. Like something that had been kept behind glass was now standing in open air. "I am not selling this land to Gordon Dalton, and I am not walking away, whatever it costs me." A silence. Then Caleb Walker nodded, once the single conclusive nod of a man who has heard what he needed to hear and has made a decision about it. "Then let's make sure it doesn't cost you everything," he said. The weekend before the Monday morning appointment was the longest Eleanor Whitmore could remember in recent years. Not because nothing happened, but because everything happened quietly below the surface in the particular way of a situation that is building toward something and knows it. Caleb Walker took a room at the hotel on Maple Street, not the best room, not the cheapest. He paid 3 days in advance, which was enough to prevent the kind of casual questions that short notice stays attracted, and he spent Saturday morning at the livery with his horse, and Saturday afternoon covering the town in the unhurried way of a man with nothing particular in mind. Eleanor knew better. She knew exactly what he was doing, because she had spent 11 months doing a quieter version of it herself, watching cataloging, understanding the weight and movement of this town, the way you understand a body of water before you decide to cross it. She opened the store Saturday as usual. She did not change anything about her routine. She weighed sugar and wrapped parcels and took money and made change and said good morning to the people who said good morning and nodded to the ones who didn't, and she gave nothing away in her face that hadn't been there the day before. But she was watching too. She watched Gordon Dalton walk past her store at 9:30, which he did every Saturday on his way to his own, and she noticed this time that he slowed as he passed, just slightly. The kind of slow that suggests something has adjusted in a person's calculation without being able to identify precisely what. He'd heard about Caleb Walker. Of course he had. Red Valley was not a large town, and a stranger who stepped between Carl Briggs and a lone woman and said what Caleb had said would not go unnoticed before sundown. Good, she thought. Let him recalculate. At noon, Agnes Holt came into the store. Agnes was 63 years old and had run the town's seamstress shop for 30 years and had a talent for knowing everything that moved in Red Valley, which she deployed selectively and with what she considered appropriate discretion, and which Eleanor had always considered to be the closest thing the town had to a newspaper. "There's a man been asking questions about you," Agnes said, setting 3 spools of thread on the counter with the air of someone reporting on weather conditions. "I know about him," Eleanor said. "Know about him," Agnes repeated with a particular intonation. "He spent an hour talking to Earl Morrow at the livery this morning." "Earl talks to everyone. Not like this." Agnes leaned forward slightly. "Earl was telling me about it 20 minutes ago because Earl has sense, which not everyone in this town can claim. The man Walker, is it?" "Caleb Walker," Eleanor said. "Walker was asking about the county records from 2 years ago, about who filed what and when in regard to the land office accounts." Agnes paused. "Earl said he's seen men like that before. Men from the Land Commission." Eleanor continued counting the thread spools. "Did he?" "Earl thinks he's here to investigate something official," Agnes said. "Earl may be right," Eleanor said carefully. "He may also be wrong. Either way, I'd appreciate it if the discussion stayed quiet for a few more days." Agnes studied her for a long moment. Agnes Holt was a woman who had seen a great many things in 30 years of being in the business of clothes and conversation, and she could read a room the way some men read trail signs. "That debt notice Carl Briggs served you yesterday," Agnes said. Her voice had changed. Lower, more direct. "Half the town saw it. Half the town usually sees everything, Eleanor said. Dalton's been telling people the store is failing, Agnes said. That you've been mismanaging it. That Gerald left debts nobody knew about, and that it's a shame, but some people just aren't suited to business. She stopped. I want you to know that's what he's saying. Because you deserve to know who's spreading it and why. Eleanor set down the thread. She looked at Agnes Holt, at the lined, frank face of a woman who had known her since she was 7 years old, who had made her first good dress for her mother's funeral, who had looked at her every time she came into that seamstress shop, with the particular neutrality of someone who treated all customers the same, regardless of what size cloth they required. "Thank you, Agnes," she said, and she meant it entirely. "He's wrong, you know," Agnes said briskly, picking up her spools and preparing to leave. "Gerald raised you to run numbers and people both. Anyone paying attention could see that." She made a small sound that was as close to a snort as a woman of Agnes's dignity allowed. "Most people in this town aren't paying attention. That doesn't make them right." She left. Eleanor stood at the counter for a moment afterward, with something warm and unfamiliar sitting in her chest that she eventually identified as the simple, startling sensation of being defended. Not rescued, not pitied, defended as a matter of fact. She filed it away and went back to work. Caleb came back to the store at 3 in the afternoon on Saturday. He came in without ceremony, the way he had come in the first time, the sound of his boots on the boards, the hat, the dust. He was alone and looked entirely unhurried. "Peck," he said without preamble, because they were apparently past preambles. "The clerk. He boards at Mrs. Tanner's house on Church Street." "I know," Eleanor said. "He came back from the land office yesterday afternoon, a Saturday, which is unusual, and spent 40 minutes there before leaving fast." Caleb placed both hands flat on the counter. "Something spooked him. Either Briggs told Dalton about my involvement, and Dalton's putting pressure on Peck to make the paperwork problems ironclad, or Peck is doing something he doesn't want discovered, and is making sure it's clean before Monday. Either way, we need to talk to him before Monday," Eleanor said. "That's what I was thinking," Caleb said. "The question is how." Eleanor considered this. She thought about Harold Peck. His nervous hands, the way he always addressed her as Miss Whitmore, with a formality that was slightly excessive. The way he had 3 months ago started avoiding her eyes. She thought about what she knew of his situation. Young, new to the position, answering to Commissioner Rourke, who answered to whoever put the most money in his direction. "He's not a bad man," she said. "I don't think he is. I think he's a young man who got pulled into something too quickly to understand what it was, and now he's in far enough that getting out looks worse than staying in." She paused. "Men like that don't respond to confrontation. They shut down, they get defensive, and they protect the decision they've already made, because reversing it means admitting it." Caleb looked at her steadily. "What do they respond to?" "Permission," she said. "The sense that someone sees them clearly and isn't going to punish them for the truth if they tell it." She straightened the manifest beside the register. "I'll go see him Sunday evening, alone." "That may not be safe," Caleb said. "Not a command, not a veto, an observation." Mrs. Tanner's boarding house on Church Street on a Sunday evening is about as safe as Red Valley gets, Eleanor said dryly. "I'll be home before dark." He held her gaze for a moment. She returned it without flinching, because she was a woman who had made her own decisions for 11 months in a town that thought her incapable of making them, and she was not about to apologize for continuing. "All right," he said. "I want you at the land office Monday morning before I arrive," she said. 8 o'clock. I'll be there at 8:30. If you're already in the room when I come in, it changes the geometry of it. They've been dealing with a woman alone. They haven't dealt with a witness yet." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but its near relation. "You've been planning this longer than 2 days." "I've been planning it for 11 months, she said. "I just didn't have all the pieces." She looked at him directly. "You're a piece I didn't expect." He held her gaze. "That makes 2 of us, Miss Whitmore." The Sunday evening visit to Harold Peck went nothing like Eleanor had imagined it. She had imagined nervousness, deflection, possibly a door closed in her face. What she found was a young man sitting on the front porch of Mrs. Tanner's boarding house, in the dusky heat of a Colorado Sunday, holding a glass of water and looking at the street with the expression of a person waiting for something they know is coming and cannot outrun. He saw her approach and went very still. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Peck," she said. She stopped at the foot of the porch steps. "I'm not here to threaten you. I want to be clear about that right away." He looked at his glass of water. "Then what are you here for?" "I'm here because I think you know what's been done with my father's files," she said. "And I think you've been carrying it alone. And I think you're scared. And I think you're right to be scared, because the men who put you in this position are not men who will protect you when it comes apart." Harold Peck's jaw tightened. He was 26 years old and looked younger, and he looked in this moment very young indeed. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, to the water glass. "Your hands are shaking," she said, gently, without accusation, just as a fact. He looked down. They were in fact trembling slightly against the glass. "Mr. Peck," Eleanor said. She did not move from the foot of the steps. She kept her voice even and her body still because she was asking him to trust her, and she understood that trust is not produced by pressure. "My father was a good man. He worked this land for 30 years. He paid his debts honestly. What is happening to his store and his property is wrong, and the people doing it are counting on the fact that I have nobody to stand beside me and you have too much to lose." She paused. "But you already have too much to lose. That's already true. The only question now is which direction you go when it falls." The silence stretched. Somewhere on Church Street, a dog barked once and went quiet. Harold Peck set his glass down on the porch railing. He put both hands flat on his knees. He stared at the street. "The extension you filed was valid," he said, very quietly, to the street. "I processed it myself. The seal is real. The date is real. All of it is exactly what it should be." Eleanor held very still. "Commissioner Rourke told me 3 weeks ago that the filing had been found to have a procedural error," Peck continued. "He said it would need to be voided and refiled. But when I looked at the original—" He stopped, swallowed. "There was no procedural error. I've been filing documents for 2 years. I know what a proper filing looks like." "What did you do?" Eleanor said. "I didn't void it," he said. "I couldn't. I kept saying I needed more time to review it. Rourke kept pushing. And then Briggs came in 2 days ago, and I realized—" He stopped again. His voice was fraying at the edges. "I realized the debt notice they served you was based on the assumption that your extension had already been voided. Which means Rourke told Briggs it was voided before I'd actually done anything. Which means the notice is fraudulent," Eleanor said. He finally looked at her. His face was miserable and young and frightened, and beneath that something that looked like profound exhausted relief. "Yes," he said. "It's fraudulent." Eleanor breathed. Once. Slowly. "Mr. Peck," she said, "will you come to the land office Monday morning and say exactly what you just told me in front of a witness?" He closed his eyes. "If I do that," he said, "Rourke will have me removed. I'll lose my position. I might not be able to work in this county again." "If you don't," Eleanor said, "you'll spend the rest of your career knowing you helped a corrupt man take a widow's land and water rights from her." She kept her voice even. "I can't tell you which is worse to live with, but I can tell you that I have documentation. I have a witness who understands land commission law, and I intend to be at the county seat on Tuesday if Monday doesn't resolve. Rourke is going to be answering questions either way. The only thing you can control is which side of those questions you're on." Harold Peck opened his eyes. He stared at the street for a long moment. "8 o'clock, he said at last. 8:30, Eleanor said. "I'll be there at 8:30. He nodded. Once, looking at his hands. She said good night and walked back down Church Street in the long, warm light of a Colorado Sunday evening. And she did not let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened until she was back inside the store, with the door locked and the lamp lit and the papers spread on the table in front of her. Then she sat down, pressed both hands flat on her father's ledger, and breathed. She had spent 11 months waiting for the ground to stop moving. She had spent 11 months telling herself she was managing. She was fine. She was holding, when in truth she had been holding with everything she had, and was very near the end of what she had left to hold with. She was not fixed. Not yet. Monday was still coming, and Monday had teeth in it, and Commissioner Rourke and Gordon Dalton would not dissolve simply because a frightened clerk had told the truth on a Sunday porch. There was still a very real possibility that this would go wrong in ways she hadn't anticipated. But she was not holding alone anymore. She thought about Caleb Walker. About what he had said those people deserve better than what they usually get. She thought about the way he shook her hand fully directly without condescension. She thought about a man who had lost his father's land and then spent years riding into towns like this one, and sometimes occasionally staying when everyone else rode on. She thought about Harold Peck's shaking hands and the particular relief on his face when he had said what he'd been holding. Sometimes the thing you need is not rescue. Sometimes it's simply someone who makes it possible to tell the truth. She picked up her pen and began writing down everything Peck had told her precisely and in order, because she was a woman who kept records and she intended to keep this one. Monday was coming. She intended to be ready for it. And at 8 o'clock the next morning, before she had finished her coffee, someone knocked on the back door of Whitmore General Goods, hard fast, the kind of knock that doesn't wait for a considered response. And when Eleanor opened it, she found herself looking at a face she had not expected at all. It was Clara Hayes, Victor's wife. Her eyes were red from crying, and she was holding an envelope in both hands, and she said without greeting or preamble, "I found something in Victor's desk. I think it changes everything, and I don't know who else to bring it to." Eleanor looked at the envelope, then at Clara Hayes's face. Then she opened the door all the way and stepped back. "Come in," she said. Clara Hayes sat at Eleanor's back table with both hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, and she told her story the way people tell things they have been holding too long in fragments at first, circling the center, then all at once in a rush that couldn't be stopped. Victor had been working with Dalton for 8 months. Not openly, not in any way that could be easily seen, but Clara had found things. A letter in the bottom drawer of his desk beneath the false panel he thought she didn't know about. A second letter tucked inside a legal reference book he hadn't opened in 2 years. Receipts for amounts of money that had no accounting in their household books. "He's been feeding Dalton information," Clara said. Her voice was controlled but barely. "About accounts. About who owes what, who's behind on payments, who might be pressured. Victor knows this town. He knows who has debt and who doesn't, and who's too proud to ask for help." She paused. "He used to talk about your father's land, the spring. He called it the most undervalued asset in the county." Eleanor set her coffee cup down with careful steadiness. "When did he start talking about it?" "Before we were married," Clara said. And then she looked up from the table and met Eleanor's eyes for the first time. And in that look was something complicated. Guilt and something older than guilt. And the particular shame of a woman who has understood something too late and is not sure what to do with the understanding. "Eleanor, I need to say something to you." "Say it." "I knew he broke the engagement badly. Everyone knew. I told myself it wasn't my business." Clara's jaw tightened. "But I heard what he said to his friend that Sunday, outside the church. I was standing 6 feet away and I heard it, and I laughed because everyone else was laughing, and I didn't—" She stopped. "I didn't know you well enough to know that I should have said something. I know that's not an excuse." The room was very quiet. Eleanor looked at Clara Hayes at the dark circles under her eyes, and the envelope she still held in both hands, and the rigid, painful honesty of a woman who has spent a night deciding what kind of person she intends to be. "I know it isn't," Eleanor said. "But you're here now, with that envelope. So tell me what's in it." Clara laid it on the table between them and pushed it across. Inside was a contract. 2 pages written in clean legal language dated 11 weeks ago. It was an agreement between Victor Hayes and Gordon Dalton, a finder's fee arrangement with Victor providing property intelligence in exchange for a percentage of the acquisition value of each parcel Dalton successfully secured. The Whitmore land parcel was listed by name by legal description and by assessed water rights value. The figure beside the water rights assessment made Eleanor's chest go tight. She had known the spring was valuable. She had not known how valuable. "He assessed this independently," she said. Dalton had engineers come through in the spring, Clara said. Victor arranged their access, told me they were surveyors for the railroad. Her voice was hollow. There's no railroad coming. Eleanor folded the contract back into the envelope with steady hands. The steadiness surprised her. She had expected anger, the hot flooding kind, but what she felt instead was colder and more precise. The kind of clarity that comes when every suspicion you've carried for months resolves into a single clean, verifiable shape. I need to keep this, she said. I know, Clara said. That's why I brought it. Your husband will know it's gone. Yes. Clara said it without flinching. I know that too. Eleanor studied her for a moment. Are you safe at home? Clara blinked. It was clear the question hadn't occurred to her, or rather that she had been so focused on the decision to come here that she had not yet thought past it. Yes. Victor isn't... She paused. He's not that kind of man. All right, Eleanor said. But if that changes, you come here. Something moved across Clara's face. Surprise and something softer underneath it. You'd do that. You came here with this envelope, Eleanor said simply. Yes, I'd do that. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, Red Valley was waking up the sounds of a Monday beginning, boots on boards, horses, the distant clang of the smithy opening. What are you going to do with it? Clara asked. Eleanor stood and began gathering her papers with the precise, deliberate efficiency of a woman who has a great deal to accomplish in a limited amount of time. I'm going to take it to the land office in 30 minutes, along with everything else I have. And then I'm going to see what Commissioner Rourke does when the room stops being what he expected. She did not say, I am terrified. She did not say, I have been awake since 3 in the morning, and my hands won't fully stop shaking, and this is the most important morning of my life. She said nothing of those things, because they were true and private, and belonged to her alone. And because naming fear out loud before a fight has never once made the fight easier. Clara stood. She smoothed her skirt with both hands and lifted her chin in the particular way of women who have made a decision they cannot take back and have decided to stand behind it. I hope it goes the way it should, Clara said. It's going to go the way it goes, Eleanor said. But thank you for coming. She was halfway to the door when Eleanor said her name. Clara turned. Whatever happens with Victor, Eleanor said quietly. That was brave. What you did this morning. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Clara Hayes walked out into the Monday morning. Eleanor locked the store, picked up her satchel, and followed her. Caleb Walker was already at the land office when Eleanor arrived at 8:30. He was standing outside it, not inside, leaning against the post with his arms crossed and his hat level. And when she came around the corner of Clay Street, he saw her and straightened. He read her face in 1 second the way he always seemed to, and his eyes went to the satchel. Something happened, he said. Clara Hayes came to my back door this morning, Eleanor said. She watched him process that. Victor Hayes's wife. She found a contract in his desk, finder's fee arrangement with Dalton. 8 months old. Lists the Whitmore parcel by name and legal description. She patted the satchel. It's in here. Caleb was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then, that changes everything. I know, Eleanor said. Is Peck here? Arrived 10 minutes ago. Hasn't come back out. Caleb paused. Rourke got here 20 minutes before that. He had 2 men with him I don't recognize. Eleanor absorbed this. Rourke with backup meant Rourke who had been warned and had prepared. Someone had gotten word to him, possibly Briggs, possibly Dalton himself, possibly someone who had seen Caleb asking questions at the livery on Saturday and had drawn conclusions. All right, she said. She took a breath that was not as steady as she wanted it to be. Let's go in. He held the door. She went first. The Red Valley Land Office was a single large room with a counter across the middle and filing cabinets along the back wall and the county seal mounted behind the commissioner's desk, which sat in the back left corner, elevated on a low platform that had always struck Eleanor as the kind of architectural choice that says more about the man who ordered it than he intended. Commissioner Edmund Rourke was at his desk. He was a man of 50-something, with a gray mustache, and the particular bearing of men who have held minor authority long enough to have confused it with significance. He looked up when the door opened, and something moved behind his eyes, fast controlled, when he saw Eleanor Whitmore walking through it. And then he saw Caleb Walker behind her, and that something moved again differently. The two men Caleb had mentioned were standing near the filing cabinets, not doing anything, just standing. Eleanor noted them, and filed them, and kept her face completely neutral. Harold Peck was at the counter. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff he had agreed to jump from, and was now experiencing the full reality of the drop. He gripped the edge of the counter and met Eleanor's eyes and gave one small tight nod. "Miss Whitmore," Rourke said with the measured pleasantness of a man who has decided to control this room and hasn't yet realized the room has different plans. "I understand you had some concerns about your account." "I have documentation," Eleanor said. She approached the counter. She set her satchel on it and opened it with the same deliberate, unhurried efficiency she used for everything. "I have the original extension filing properly dated and sealed. I have my father's original deed with the water rights rider intact and attached. I have my complete payment history with the land office going back 3 years with no defaults." She laid each document on the counter as she named it. Clean, ordered, irrefutable. "And I have a contract signed 11 weeks ago between Gordon Dalton and Victor Hayes, arranging financial compensation to Victor Hayes for property intelligence concerning this office's accounts, specifically including the Whitmore parcel, with a listed value that suggests both parties had access to a private survey assessment that was never registered with this office." The room went very still. Rourke did not move. His face did not change in any dramatic way. But something in it settled the way something settles when a door closes that cannot be reopened. "I don't know what you think that document," he began. "Commissioner Rourke." Caleb Walker spoke from just behind Eleanor's left shoulder. His voice carried exactly the same weight it had always carried, no louder, no softer. "My name is Caleb Walker. I spent 12 years with the Federal Land Commission, and I am personally familiar with the statutes governing improper coordination between county offices and private land acquisition parties in Colorado territory." He paused. "I'd suggest we have a direct conversation, because the alternative is a referral to the Territory Commissioner's office before the end of this week, and those proceedings tend to be considerably less comfortable for everyone involved." Rourke looked at Caleb Walker. He looked at him for a long time in the way of a man recalculating everything he thought he understood about this situation. Then he looked at Harold Peck, and Peck, young frightened Harold. Peck, whose hands were shaking visibly against the counter, looked back at him and said in a voice that trembled but did not break, "The extension filing is valid. Commissioner, I processed it myself. There was no procedural error. I can state that in writing and under oath." One of the men near the filing cabinets shifted his weight. Caleb turned his head toward them, just his head, just slightly, and the movement stopped. Rourke's jaw moved. Eleanor could see him running through scenarios of this situation and finding each one closed off or closing. She had spent 11 months watching this man from a distance and had always read him as vain and acquisitive, but not particularly courageous. She had been right. "The contract between Hayes and Dalton," he said at last, and his voice had changed. The pleasantness was gone, and what was underneath was tired and careful. "Where did you obtain that?" "That's not the relevant question," Eleanor said. "The relevant question is whether this office has been operating in proper accordance with the law, and I believe Mr. Peck is prepared to provide testimony that it has not." Rourke looked at Peck again. Peck stared at the counter. He had the look of a man who has already jumped and is falling and is surprised to find the air beneath him. "I need to speak to my attorney," Rourke said. "Of course," Eleanor said. "I'll be at my store this afternoon. I'll expect a written confirmation that my extension filing is valid, and that the debt notice served by Carl Briggs on Friday is retracted, or I'll be sending copies of everything in this satchel to the Territory Commissioner's office by Wednesday's post." She picked up her documents and replaced them with precise, unhurried care. She closed the satchel. She looked at Rourke directly. My father paid his debts and kept his accounts and built his business honestly in this valley for 30 years. I intend to do the same. And I intend to do it on the land he left me." She turned from the counter. She was halfway to the door when Rourke said quietly and without his earlier pleasantness, "This isn't finished, Miss Whitmore." She stopped. She did not turn immediately. She thought of her father, of his handwriting in the ledgers of the spring on the back parcel that he had fenced and kept clean and said was the only thing in Red Valley that couldn't be argued with. Then she turned. "No," she agreed. "It isn't, but the direction it's going in just changed." She walked out. Caleb followed her. He pulled the door shut behind him with the quiet click of a man who knows how to close a door without making a statement about it, which in itself was something of a statement. They stood on the board sidewalk outside the land office. The Monday morning moved around them. Eleanor was aware that her hands inside the gloves she wore were shaking. She kept them pressed flat against the satchel and breathed through it. "Peck held," Caleb said. "He did," she said. "Rourke's going to move fast. He's going to try to reach Dalton before we can reach anyone official." "I know." Eleanor was already thinking 3 moves ahead. Agnes Holt knows everyone in this town and has a talent for making sure the right information reaches the right people. I need to talk to her before noon. She paused. And I need to find out if Victor Hayes knows his wife came to me this morning. Because if he does, he'll warn Dalton, Caleb said, and Dalton will try to make the contract disappear, claim forgery, claim something. She looked at Caleb. "Can you get to the telegraph office and send word to the territory commissioner before Rourke gets there? I don't want to wait until Wednesday." He was already moving. "I'll be back within the hour." "Caleb." He stopped. She met his eyes directly. "Thank you. For this morning. For standing there." "You didn't need me to speak for you," he said. "No," she agreed. "But having someone stand beside you when you speak, that isn't nothing." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, once turned and walked toward the telegraph office with the long, unhurried stride of a man who has somewhere to be and fully intends to get there. Eleanor went to find Agnes Holt. What happened next moved faster than Eleanor had anticipated and more publicly than she had planned. Agnes Holt, it turned out, had already been paying attention. She had been paying attention for weeks, ever since she noticed that 2 of Dalton's supply contracts seemed to involve businesses that had previously dealt exclusively with Whitmore General Goods. She had said nothing because she had no proof of anything improper, and because Agnes Holt was a woman who dealt in confirmed information, not suspicion. But she had been watching, and she had talked to people, and the network of seamstresses and boarding house keepers, and church auxiliary members, and general store regulars that Agnes maintained, with the calm efficiency of a general running a quiet campaign, had been gathering observations for 2 months, without anyone, including Dalton, understanding what was being gathered. Eleanor sat in Agnes's back room for 45 minutes and listened to what Agnes knew, and by the end of it, she had 3 additional witnesses who had observed Rourke and Dalton meeting privately on at least 4 occasions in the past 6 months, witnesses who were willing to say so in writing if someone asked them properly. "Why didn't you come to me?" Eleanor said. "Because you had enough to carry," Agnes said crisply. "And because I wasn't sure it would help until I had enough of it to matter." She folded her hands on the table. "Does it matter now?" "It matters enormously," Eleanor said. Agnes nodded with the satisfied precision of someone who has made a correct calculation. "Then let's write it down." They were still writing when the sound came from the street outside, raised voices, the particular pitch of a public confrontation, the kind that pulls people out of doorways. Eleanor looked up. Agnes was already moving toward the window. She looked out, and her expression did the thing it did when something was not particularly surprising, but was nonetheless significant. "Gordon Dalton," she said, "is on the street outside your store, and he is not alone." Eleanor stood. Dalton had brought 4 men. 2 of them Eleanor recognized as regular customers of his storemen who owed him credit, the kind of debt that makes people available for requests they'd rather not fulfill. The other 2 she recognized from the land office that morning. Howe was standing in front of Whitmore General Goods, with his arms crossed and his voice at a volume calculated to draw an audience, which it was doing. He was saying loudly, and with the particular confidence of a man who believes he has not yet been stopped, that the Whitmore property was in default, that the store was closing, and that he was prepared to offer fair market value for the building and contents to any creditor who needed to settle accounts. How was declaring victory, in public, before it was over. Eleanor stepped out of Agnes Holt's shop and walked toward him through the gathering crowd, and what she felt in that moment was not the anger she had expected, not the hot flooding kind she had braced against all morning. It was something colder and more final, like the moment when you understand that a thing you have been afraid of for a long time is smaller than the fear you gave it. She stopped 6 feet from Gordon Dalton. The crowd, which had been murmuring among itself, went quiet. Dalton looked at her. Something shifted in his face, not fear, not yet, but the first intimation of miscalculation. He had expected her at the land office. He had not expected her here now, this composed. "Mr. Dalton," she said, clearly, loud enough for the crowd. "I'd like to ask you a question." He spread his hands, a gesture of openness, of reasonableness. "Miss Whitmore, this is a business matter. When you commissioned the independent water survey of this valley," she said, "did you register it with the county land office as required by Colorado territorial law?" The crowd noise, which had been beginning to resume, stopped. Dalton blinked. Once. "I don't know what you're referring to," he said. "The survey conducted in March of this year," Eleanor said. "The one arranged through Victor Hayes, who was compensated for his assistance per the terms of a signed contract dated 11 weeks ago." She kept her voice even and clear. She was not performing. She was simply speaking facts in a town that had not yet heard them. "The survey that assessed the water rights attached to my father's land at a value considerably higher than any public record would suggest, which is interesting, given that those rights are what you've been trying to acquire." Dalton's expression had gone through 3 things in 5 seconds and was now settling on something controlled and cold. "You're making serious accusations," he said. "I'm stating documented facts," Eleanor said. "The documentation is currently in the hands of the Territory Commissioner's office, along with testimony from a land office employee about irregular handling of my filing records." She paused. "I'd also mention that Commissioner Rourke is at this moment meeting with his attorney, which I expect you already know." The crowd had gone completely, absolutely still. Dalton looked at her. She looked back. She did not look away. She had spent 3 years in the town, swallowing the particular humiliation of being measured by people who had already decided her value, and she had learned something in those 3 years that she was only now in this moment. Understanding the full weight of endurance is not the same thing as defeat. Surviving is not the same thing as conceding. And the woman who is still standing at the counter doing the work when everything is moving against her is not a woman who has given up. She is a woman who has been waiting for the moment when she has enough to stand on. "This isn't over," Dalton said. His voice was quiet now. Private. A threat rather than a performance. "You said that this morning," a voice said from the edge of the crowd. Caleb Walker had come back from the telegraph office. He was standing at the back of the gathered crowd, not pushing forward, not making theater of his arrival. Just present, steady, the way he was always steady. "What this gentleman seems to misunderstand," Caleb said, and he said it to the crowd as much as to Dalton with the particular calm of someone who has been in rooms like this before and knows how they end, is that fraud doesn't stop being fraud because the person committing it has connections. The Territory Commissioner's office has received the documentation. The testimony is on record. Whatever Mr. Dalton was counting on here in Red Valley, he should recalculate. Today. Dalton looked at Caleb. He looked at the crowd. He looked at Eleanor. He looked like a man understanding for the first time that the game he'd been playing had run out of the board. He thought he was playing it on. One of his men shifted beside him. Dalton put out one hand, a small gesture, a stop gesture, and the man stilled. Then Dalton straightened his coat, adjusted his hat, and walked away from Whitmore General Goods without another word. His men followed. The crowd watched him go. And then slowly, the way things happen in small towns when the understood order of something has changed, the crowd began to murmur again. Not the murmur of an audience watching entertainment. The murmur of people recalibrating. of people who had told themselves a story about Eleanor Whitmore, failing store, failing woman, too big, too alone, too much to manage. Encountering the version of her that had been there all along, which was simply this: a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and had been doing it without anyone's help for a very long time. Agnes Holt appeared at Eleanor's shoulder. She said nothing. She simply stood there, which coming from Agnes was its own kind of statement. And then something happened that Eleanor had not expected in any version of this morning she had imagined. The first person to speak was Mabel Dempsey, who ran the laundry on the far side of town and had barely exchanged 20 words with Eleanor in 3 years. Mabel was 60 years old and broad-shouldered and had a voice like gravel, and she said simply, and to no one in particular, her daddy built half the credit in this town. What Dalton was doing to her wasn't right, and most of us knew it. The second person was Earl Morrow from the livery, who said, I've been watching that man Dalton since he arrived. Never trusted him. Said it to my wife. The third was a woman Eleanor didn't know by name. A younger woman, a rancher's wife from the edge of the valley, who said quietly, he came to us too. Offered to buy our east pasture. Wouldn't say why he wanted it. And then the crowd was talking fully and openly in the way crowds talk when the thing everyone knew but nobody said has finally been said by someone who had more to lose than any of them. Eleanor stood in the middle of it and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not just vindication. Something quieter and more fundamental than that. The particular bone-deep sensation of being seen by a place that had looked at her for years and never actually looked. Caleb Walker appeared at her side. He did not touch her shoulder or her arm. He simply stood the way he had stood beside her at the land office counter, which was as a person who has chosen to be present without requiring anything from that presence. The Territory Commissioner's office received the telegram. He said low enough for only her to hear. They're sending an investigator. Should be here by Thursday. Thursday, she said. She absorbed this. It's not finished, he said. Dalton has resources and he'll use them. Rourke is going to try to protect himself by putting everything on Dalton, which might help you or might complicate things depending on what each of them decides to do in the next 48 hours. I know, she said. But the ground shifted today. Yes, she said. It did. She was quiet for a moment. Around them, the crowd continued its low-changed murmur. Agnes was already speaking to Mabel Dempsey with the focused, purposeful energy of a woman organizing something. Earl Morrow was shaking his head at the whole situation with the satisfied disapproval of a man who has been vindicated in a long-held opinion. Red Valley was not transformed. It was not suddenly kind or just or free of the small cruelties that accumulate in any place where people live too close together with too many judgments and not enough room. It was still the town that had laughed at her outside the church. It was still the town that had called her too much, too large, too alone to matter. But something had moved in it. Something had cracked open and let in a different kind of air. Mr. Walker, Eleanor said. Miss Whitmore. She looked at him directly, the way she looked at everything she intended to deal with honestly. Why did you stay? He was quiet for a moment. Not evasive. Just the careful quiet of a man who says things when he's sure he means them. Because you were still standing, he said. And because what was being done to you was wrong. And because... He stopped. Then with the same steady plainness he brought to everything. Because I haven't met many people who do what you do, who carry what you carry, and still show up, and still work, and still refuse to let it take what it's been trying to take. She held his gaze. I'm going to fight the next 48 hours, she said. Whatever Dalton and Rourke do, I'm going to fight it. I know, Caleb said. And then, she said, and something shifted in her voice, quieter, more personal, the first crack in the professional composure she had maintained for an entire morning and most of a very long week. I'm going to sleep for approximately 2 days. It startled a short, low sound from Caleb Walker that she realized with some surprise was a laugh. Not performed, not courteous. A real one, briefly and honestly present. She found to her own surprise that she was almost smiling back. But before anything else could settle between them, before the morning could ease into something less urgent, the door of the land office, 50 yards down the street, opened again. Harold Peck came out at a near run. He spotted Caleb first, then Eleanor, and he pushed through the thinning crowd with the speed of someone carrying news that cannot wait. He reached them out of breath, eyes wide. "Rourke just left," he said, "out the back. His attorney was supposed to meet him at noon, and he didn't wait. He took a saddlebag, and he left." He grabbed Caleb's arm. "And someone broke into the filing room. The drawer where your extension was held, Miss Whitmore, the original, is gone." The crowd noise dropped away. Eleanor felt the cold clarity return, that particular precise sharpening that she had come to recognize as her mind, deciding there was no more room for anything except what needed doing. She looked at Caleb. He was already looking at her. "Do you have your copies?" he said. "In the satchel," she said. "Always." "Then we have what we need." He turned to Peck. "You said the original is gone. Is your testimony about its validity still intact?" "Yes," Peck said. "I'll still say it. I'll say it in writing today if you need me to." "I do need you to," Eleanor said. She was already moving. "Come to the store. Now, both of you." She walked back toward Whitmore General Goods with Harold Peck and Caleb Walker behind her, and the Monday morning opened around her, and the sun was brutal, and the dust was thick, and the sign above her door still needed painting, and none of that mattered at all. Because Rourke had run. And men who run are men who know they've lost. The real question, the one that would keep her awake again tonight, the one that crackled beneath every other thought, like a fire she couldn't yet see, was what Gordon Dalton was going to do now that his architect had fled. Because Dalton was not the kind of man who ran. He was the kind of man who, when a plan collapsed, built something worse on its rubble. And he still had the water. Or thought he did. She was not done yet. Not even close. But neither, for the first time in 11 months, was she alone. Harold Peck wrote his testimony at Eleanor's back table in 40 minutes, and he wrote it in the careful, precise hand of a man who understands that words on paper outlast the fear that made them difficult to write. He did not hedge. He did not soften. He stated in plain and legal language that the extension filing for the Whitmore land account had been properly processed, that no procedural error existed, that he had been instructed by Commissioner Edmund Rourke to void a valid document, and that he had declined to do so. He stated the dates. He stated the conversations. He signed his name at the bottom with a hand that trembled slightly, and then went still. Eleanor witnessed it. Caleb witnessed it. Eleanor made 3 copies by hand, while Caleb read the original for accuracy, and then she sealed 1 copy in an envelope addressed to the Territory Commissioner's office, and handed it to Caleb without a word, because there was an understanding between them by now that did not require words for every transaction. "Post office before noon," she said. "Already going," he said, and was out the door. Peck sat at the table after Caleb left, looking at the signed statement in front of him, with the expression of a man who has just stepped off a very high ledge and is surprised to find solid ground. Eleanor poured him more coffee and set it beside him, and did not say anything reassuring, because she was a woman who respected people enough not to offer comfort they hadn't asked for. "What happens to me now?" Peck said. Not dramatically, just as a real question. "Rourke is gone," Eleanor said. "That means the position of County Land Office Administrator is vacant. Someone will need to manage those records through the investigation. Someone who knows where everything is and how it was filed." She looked at him steadily. "Someone whose testimony establishes them as the person who maintained the integrity of the office when the commissioner abandoned it." Peck looked up at her. "That's not guaranteed," she said honestly. "But it's a real possibility. And it's a better position than the one you were in at 7 o'clock this morning." I was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your father came in once about a year before he died. I was new to the position. He spent 20 minutes explaining the water rights rider on his deed to me because he wanted to make sure I understood it. He said—" Peck paused. "He said he wasn't worried about himself, but he wanted someone in that office to know what it meant for whoever came after him." Eleanor went very still. "He knew," she said. "I think he suspected," Peck said. "Same as you said last night." He looked at his coffee. "I should have done this sooner. I should have come to you months ago." "Yes," she said, "because it was true, and he knew it, and she was not going to pretend otherwise." But you're here now, and what you wrote this morning matters." She picked up her copy of the testimony and slid it into the satchel with everything else. "Go back to the office. Keep the records intact. Don't let anyone in that filing room without written authorization, and if anyone tries, you send for me immediately." Peck nodded. He picked up his hat. He looked, Eleanor thought, like a different person than the man who had sat on Mrs. Tanner's porch the previous evening. Not because his situation had dramatically improved, but because he had chosen a direction, and the choosing itself had changed the shape of him. "Miss Whitmore," he said at the door. "For what it's worth, everyone knows what your father built here. Most people know what you've been doing to keep it. They just—" He stopped. "This town is better at watching than it is at speaking up." "I know," she said. "But that's changing." He left. Eleanor stood alone in the store for approximately 90 seconds, which was all the alone time she intended to allow herself, and she pressed both hands flat on the counter and breathed and thought about her father explaining a water rights rider to a nervous young clerk because he wanted someone to know what it meant for whoever came after him. He had known she would be the one who came after him. He had been planting things for her to find. She picked up her pen and went back to work. The first sign that Gordon Dalton was not going to accept Monday's events quietly came at 2 in the afternoon when Carl Briggs walked into the store. He did not bring his brother this time. He did not bring anyone. He came alone, which was either confidence or calculation, and he stood in front of Eleanor's counter with his hat in his hands in a posture that was not quite conciliatory, but was no longer the aggressive certainty of Friday. "I'd like to speak to you," he said. "You're speaking to me now," Eleanor said. She did not stop what she was doing, which was entering the morning's transactions in the ledger. She did not look up immediately. "Privately." "This is private enough," she said. She looked up then. "What do you want, Mr. Briggs?" Carl Briggs had the look of a man who has spent several hours understanding that the ground under his feet belongs to a different landscape than the one he thought he was standing on. He was not a stupid man. He was a man who had made a calculation, and the calculation had been wrong, and he was experienced enough to know that doubling down on a bad calculation is how men go from making a mistake to making a ruin. "I want you to know that the debt notice I served Friday was done on instruction," he said. "I was told the filing had been voided. I was told it was a legitimate collection action." "By Commissioner Rourke," Eleanor said. He didn't confirm it directly, but he didn't deny it either, which was its own kind of confirmation. "I wasn't told about any arrangement between Dalton and Hayes. I wasn't part of that." Eleanor set her pen down and gave him her full attention, which she could see made him marginally more uncomfortable than being ignored had. "What do you want from me, Mr. Briggs?" "I want you to know the distinction," he said. "When the territory investigator comes, You want to get ahead of it," she said. He held her gaze. To his credit, he didn't flinch from the plain version of it. "Yes." Eleanor studied him for a moment. Carl Briggs was not a good man in any particular way, but he was a man who understood practical reality, which in this situation was almost as useful. "Then tell the investigator exactly what you just told me," she said. "Who gave you the instruction, what you were told and what you were not told? Exactly and completely. Don't leave anything out trying to protect yourself, because the parts you leave out are always the parts that surface later." "And the notice," he said. "You already know the notice is fraudulent," she said. "Your acting on Rourke's instruction makes you a participant. How much of a participant depends on what you say and when you say it." She picked her pen back up. "I'd suggest sooner." Briggs put his hat back on. He stood there for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, which she read as a man wanting to say something he was finding difficult. Then, "I said things on Friday that were out of line, in my personal conduct." Eleanor kept her pen moving on the ledger page. "Yes, you did." "I'm not going to try to explain it." "Good," she said. "I wouldn't find the explanation useful." She looked up one more time. "But if you tell the truth to the investigator, we can both move forward from Friday. That's the only version of moving forward that's available to you right now." He nodded once and left. Eleanor watched the door close behind him and thought about how much of human behavior, when it came down to it, was simply people recalculating when the numbers changed. She did not feel satisfaction about Carl Briggs in any warm or uncomplicated way. But she felt the particular utility of a piece moved to the correct position on a board that was still very much in play. Because Dalton was still out there, and Rourke was gone, but not finished. And the investigator didn't arrive until Thursday. Tuesday was going to tell her a great deal. What Tuesday told her was that Gordon Dalton was a man who, when a plan collapsed, built something worse on its rubble, exactly as she had anticipated. The rumor started early before 8 in the morning, before Eleanor had finished unlocking the store. It traveled in the particular way that damaging rumors travel in small towns, not shouted, not announced, but murmured from person to person in the spaces between other conversations, always attributed to someone else, always just heard, never directly sourced. The rumor was this, that Eleanor Whitmore had fabricated the contract between Victor Hayes and Gordon Dalton. That the document she had presented at the land office Monday morning was a forgery. That Clara Hayes, a wronged wife, had been manipulated into delivering a false document by a desperate woman who understood she was about to lose everything and had manufactured evidence to avoid it. Eleanor heard it first from a woman who came into the store at 8:15 and told her with the breathless, distressed energy of someone who considers themselves a messenger of unfortunate truth. Eleanor thanked her for the information, waited until she left, and then stood at the counter for 30 seconds with her hands flat on the wood and ran through every implication of what she'd just heard. Dalton was smart. She had known he was smart. The fabrication claim was clean and fast, and it reframed the entire narrative of Monday in a way that put her on the defensive, because the burden of proving authenticity on a document is harder than the burden of claiming forgery, especially in a town already predisposed to doubt her. How was also, she noted, doing this before the territory investigator arrived. He needed the investigation to begin in an environment where her evidence was already questioned. If he could establish doubt before Thursday, the investigator would arrive into a cloud rather than a clear sky. She needed Clara Hayes. Now. She was halfway to her coat when the door opened and Caleb walked in. He looked at her face and said, "You heard. Fabrication claim," she said. "He's trying to discredit the contract before Thursday." "I know." Caleb was already steady, which was useful because she was less steady than she was showing. "Clara Hayes is at the hotel. She came in this morning with a travel bag. I don't think she went home last night." Eleanor stopped moving. "Victor." She sent a message to his office yesterday afternoon telling him what she'd done. His response, apparently, was to go to Dalton. Caleb's voice was even, but there was something beneath the evenness, a tight, controlled anger that Eleanor had not heard from him before. Dalton's fabrication claim specifically names Clara as an unwilling participant. He's trying to protect Victor by making Clara into a victim of Eleanor's manipulation, rather than a woman who made her own choice. The particular cold clarity settled back into Eleanor. "He's going after Clara," she said. "To get to you," Caleb said. "Yes." Eleanor put her coat on. "Take me to her." Clara Hayes was in room 4 of the Red Valley Hotel, sitting on the edge of the bed with her travel bag unopened beside her, and the particular contained stillness of a woman in the space between a decision made and its consequences arrived. She looked up when Eleanor came in, and something in her face went through relief and dread and resolve in about 3 seconds. "You heard what he's saying," Clara said. "I heard," Eleanor said. She sat down in the chair across from Clara without invitation because there was no time for ceremony. "I need to ask you something directly. Did Victor contact you this morning?" "He sent a note." Clara's hands tightened in her lap. "It said I had been manipulated by a woman with an agenda, and that I should recant my statement and say I was confused about what I'd found. And," Clara looked at her steadily, "and I burned the note." Something loosened in Eleanor's chest. Not everything, but something. "The contract you brought," Eleanor said. "Is there anything else in that desk? Anything that establishes the contract's authenticity letters? Other correspondence? Anything that references the arrangement between Victor and Dalton in a context that can't be attributed to fabrication?" Clara was quiet for a moment. The quiet of someone searching their memory with a precision they haven't previously applied. "Victor kept a receipt book," she said slowly. "Personal ledger. He was particular about recording everything he said. It was the rancher's habit from his father. In the back section there were entries I didn't understand. Amounts with initials beside them. GD. Gordon Dalton, Eleanor said. Monthly for 8 months, Clara said. I didn't know what they meant at the time. I didn't know to look. Could you get that ledger? Clara looked at her. I'd need to go back to the house. I know, Eleanor said. I'm not asking you to do that if it isn't safe. It's safe, Clara said. He's many things. He's not that kind of man. The phrase echoed from Sunday morning and had the same complicated quality. Not a defense. An accurate assessment of a limited truth. What would you do with it? Establish a corroborating financial record that exists independent of the contract, Eleanor said. If the contract is fabricated as Dalton claims, the ledger entries can't be. They predate anything I could have engineered. They're in Victor's own handwriting, which can be verified. She leaned forward slightly. Clara, this doesn't just help me. This establishes what Victor actually did, which is something you're going to need on record for your own situation when this is resolved. Clara looked at her for a long time. Two women sitting in a hotel room on a Tuesday morning in the summer of 1885, with a great deal of history between them that was not simple, and a great deal of future that was not yet written. I'll get the ledger, Clara said. Give me 2 hours. Eleanor stood. I'll be at the store. Come directly there. Don't speak to anyone between here and the house, and between the house and me. She was at the door when Clara said, Eleanor. She turned. I know this is late, all of it. I know it doesn't undo what was said and what was laughed at. Clara held her gaze without flinching. I was someone who could have been different, and wasn't. I just want to say that plainly. Eleanor looked at her. The impulse was to soften it, to say it was fine. It was in the past. It didn't matter. All the responses she had trained herself in the smoothings over, that made rooms more comfortable and changed nothing. She didn't say any of them. You're being different now, Eleanor said. That counts for something real. She paused. Come to the store. 2 hours. She left the hotel and walked back into the Tuesday sun and found Caleb waiting outside with the particular patience she had come to associate entirely with him. She'll get the ledger, Eleanor said. Good, he said. Then, there's something else. Something in his voice made her stop. Victor Hayes was at Dalton's store an hour ago, Caleb said. He was there for 20 minutes, and he left by the back. I don't know what was said, but 15 minutes after he left, 2 of Dalton's men rode out of town on the road that goes past your property. The cold clarity sharpened to a point. The spring, she said. That's what I think, Caleb said. Eleanor did not hesitate. Go, now. Don't let them do anything to that fence or that access. I'm not leaving you here alone while... Caleb. She said his name with the full flat force of a woman who means what she says. That spring is the entire reason this has been happening. If they damage the access or contaminate the source or pull down that fence, we lose the central argument. I have the documentation. I have Peck's testimony. I have Clara getting the ledger. What I cannot replace is the physical water source my father spent 30 years protecting. She met his eyes. Go. I'll be fine. Agnes is next door, and Carl Briggs just spent 20 minutes telling me he wants to cooperate with the investigation. This street is safer for me right now than it's been in a year. He held her gaze. She could see him running the same calculations she had just run, and arriving at the same conclusion and not liking it, which was reasonable, but also recognizing it. I'll be back before dark, he said. Take the fence post to the east side, she said. My father marked the property line with iron stakes. If they try to claim the fence line is incorrect, those stakes are the original survey markers. He looked at her steadily. Your father really did prepare for this. He loved this land, she said. And he knew me. He knew I'd need something solid to stand on. She took a breath. Go. Caleb Walker turned and walked with long, unhurried purpose toward the livery, and Eleanor went back to her store, and the Tuesday morning continued its slow progress toward whatever Wednesday was going to bring. Clara Hayes arrived at the store at 11:30, not 2 hours later, but 1 hour and 40 minutes later, which told Eleanor she had moved fast. She came through the back door because Eleanor had told her to use the back door, and because Clara, having chosen a direction, was a woman who followed instructions precisely. She was breathing slightly faster than normal, and she was carrying a slim ledger book with a dark green cover that she set on the table without ceremony. "Third page from the back," she said. "Every entry for 8 months." Eleanor opened it. The handwriting was Victor's. She recognized it from the debt notice and from 8 months of courtship letters she had burned a long time ago. The entries were dated, initialed, and recorded in the meticulous way of a man who trusted numbers more than memory. GD appeared beside 8 separate entries. The amounts corresponded almost precisely to the timeline of events at Whitmore General Goods, the first entry falling exactly 3 weeks before Eleanor had first noticed a change in her account activity. It was not the contract, but it corroborated the contract in a way that no claim of fabrication could easily reach. "This is exactly what we needed," Eleanor said. Clara sat down. She looked exhausted in the specific way of a woman who has been making difficult decisions on very little sleep for 48 hours. "What happens now?" "Now we wait for Thursday," Eleanor said. "And we make sure that between now and Thursday, every piece of documentation we have is secured in a place Dalton cannot reach." She looked at Clara directly. "And I'd suggest you write your own account what you found when what Victor said in his note, everything, in your own hand, dated and signed today." Clara nodded. She picked up the pen. Eleanor slid toward her and pulled a sheet of paper from the stack Eleanor kept on the table, and she began to write. They sat together in the back room of Whitmore General Goods for the next hour, 2 women who had never sat together in any room for any reason, and the writing went on, and the afternoon moved around them, and neither of them spoke unnecessarily, because there was work to do, and they were both women who understood what that meant. It was Agnes Holt who brought the next piece of news, arriving at the back door at 1:30 with the particular brisk urgency she deployed when a thing was important enough to make her move quickly. "Dalton has been to the judge," Agnes said. "Judge Harmon. He filed an emergency injunction this morning claiming the documents you presented Monday constitute fraud and requesting a temporary order freezing any action on the Whitmore account pending investigation." Eleanor set down her pen. Across the table, Clara looked up. "Can he do that?" Clara said. "He just did," Agnes said. "Harmon signed it an hour ago." Eleanor felt the thing that was not quite fear. The cold, specific sensation of a move she hadn't anticipated arriving faster than she'd prepared for. An injunction from Harmon meant that any action on her behalf, including the territory investigator's findings, could be formally delayed. It meant Dalton had bought himself time, and in that time he could rebuild, refile, and reinforce the fabrication claim with whatever else he could construct. "Judge Harmon," Eleanor said. "Is he?" "I don't know," Agnes said. "I don't know if he's in Dalton's pocket or if he simply believed what Dalton presented. Harmon is not a bad man. He's a man who acts on what he's given." Agnes's eyes were sharp and direct. "Which means if he's given something better than what Dalton gave him, he reconsiders." Eleanor looked at the documents on the table. She looked at Clara's written account still in process. She looked at Victor Hayes's ledger with its 8 months of careful initials. She thought about her father writing letters in duplicate keeping records in 2 places, explaining a water rights rider to a nervous young clerk just because he wanted someone to understand it. She thought about what Caleb had said, those people deserve better than what they usually get. She thought about what she herself had said standing in front of the land office that morning. The direction it's going in just changed. "Agnes," she said, "do you know where Judge Harmon takes his lunch?" Agnes blinked. Then something in her expression shifted into the particular appreciation of a woman who recognizes a direct approach when she sees one. "Mackenzie's on the East End, every day at noon. He's probably there now." Eleanor stood. She gathered the ledger, Clara's account, her own documentation, Harold Peck's testimony, and the original contract. She put them in the satchel with the focused efficiency of someone who has decided what happens next and is moving toward it without waiting for anyone's permission. "Clara," she said, "stay here. Lock the back door. Don't open it for anyone except Caleb Walker or Agnes." "Where are you going?" Clara said. "To have lunch," Eleanor said, with a judge who has been given only one side of a story. She went out the front door of Whitmore General Goods and walked east on Main Street, and she walked the way she had always walked through this town, straight and steady, taking up the space her body occupied without apology or diminishment. And for the first time in 3 years, she was not thinking about who was watching, or what they were thinking, or what they said when they said it. She was thinking about what she was going to say to Judge Harmon. She had the truth, and she had these documents, and she had spent 48 hours watching this situation from every angle, and she knew this. Gordon Dalton was counting on her to be what this town had always expected her to be. Overwhelmed, reactive, grateful for any small resolution that let her keep the store without the land. She was none of those things. She opened the door of Mackenzie's restaurant and walked in, and Judge Harmon looked up from his soup, and Eleanor Whitmore sat down across from him without being invited and set her satchel on the table and said clearly and without preamble, "Your Honor, I believe you were given incomplete information this morning. I'd like 10 minutes of your time to provide the rest." Harmon looked at her over his soup for a long moment. He was 60 years old and had the measured, careful gaze of a man who has spent his career evaluating what people say and why they say it. "Miss Whitmore," he said. 10 minutes, she said. "And then whatever you decide, I'll abide by it." He set his spoon down. He looked at her satchel. He looked at her face, not the way most people in this town looked at her, not with assessment or dismissal, but with the professional attention of a man whose job is to look at people and determine what they're carrying. 10 minutes, he said. "You'd better use them well." "Yes, sir," she said. "I intend to." She opened the satchel, and she laid the truth on the table, the way her father had taught her to lay everything on the table fully, without withholding, without apology, without any version of it that was softened for someone else's comfort. Judge Harmon's soup went cold. Howe was still reading when his 10 minutes became 30, and 30 became an hour, and the afternoon stretched long and hot over Red Valley, and somewhere on the road east of town. Caleb Walker was riding back from the spring with iron survey stakes, and the evidence of 2 men who had tried to move a fence line and failed. And somewhere in the back room of Whitmore General Goods, Clara Hayes was finishing a written account that cost her a marriage and a silence she'd kept too long. And somewhere a territory investigator was 2 days from arriving with authority that Dalton's emergency injunction could delay but not stop. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Tuesday in the summer of 1885, Judge Harmon folded his hands on the table and looked at Eleanor Whitmore and said, "The injunction was improperly obtained. I'm issuing a withdrawal order this evening, and I am referring the conduct of Commissioner Rourke and Mr. Dalton to the Territory Court on my own authority." Eleanor did not cry. She had not allowed herself to cry since the morning she found her father's debt in the roll-top desk, and she was not going to start now. But something moved through her, not relief, which was too small a word, but something larger and more fundamental. The specific sensation of a weight that has been carried so long, it has stopped feeling like a weight, and starts feeling like the shape of the body itself, and then suddenly shifts. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "I was misled. I should have asked more questions before I signed." He paused. "Your father was a good man. I knew Gerald Whitmore for 20 years. "I know," she said. "He'd be pleased with what you did here today," Harmon said. Come to think of it, he'd have expected nothing less. Eleanor picked up her satchel. She stood. She thought about her father, who had kept records in 2 places, and explained water rights to young clerks, and died on a November morning before she had understood everything he was trying to tell her. She thought, "I know, Dad. I know." She walked out of Mackenzie's restaurant into the late afternoon sun and stood on the east end of Main Street and breathed once all the way down. Then she turned back toward the store because there was still work to do. There was always still work to do. But she walked differently than she had walked into Mackenzie's. Something had settled in her spine, not new, exactly, but more fully present, more fully hers. The town moved around her, and she moved through it, and she did not calculate the eyes or the whispers or the distance between who she was and who this place had decided she was, because that distance had been closing all week and was now, she thought, very nearly gone. She was halfway back when she saw Caleb's horse outside the store. She came in the front door and found him at the counter, dusty from the road, his hat in his hand, talking to Agnes in low, rapid sentences. He looked up when she came in, and something in his face shifted in a way she was beginning to recognize as relief, though he carried it quietly, the way he carried everything. "The fence is intact," he said. "Dalton's men didn't get far. I have the survey stakes, and I have both of their names." Harmon withdrew the injunction, Eleanor said. "He's referring to the territory court independently." The room went quiet. Agnes made a sound that was unmistakably satisfaction. Caleb looked at Eleanor for a long moment. She looked back. She was tired in a way that went down to the bone, and her hands were finally genuinely still. And the Tuesday afternoon was turning toward evening outside the windows, and the sign above the door still needed painting, and the step still had its crack. "The investigator comes Thursday," Caleb said. "Thursday," she agreed. "Dalton isn't finished," he said. "No," she said. "But neither am I." She set the satchel on the counter. "Neither are we." Something moved in Caleb Walker's face again. That quiet, unhurried shift that she had been learning to read over the past 4 days, and what it said stripped of everything. He would not yet put into words was simply this: "I know. I see you. I'm not going anywhere." Eleanor Whitmore picked up her pen. Outside, the sun was going down on Red Valley, and somewhere across town, Gordon Dalton was running out of moves, and somewhere a judge was writing a referral order, and in 2 days, a territory investigator was arriving on the morning stage. But right now, in this store in this evening, there was work to do. And she had never once, not in 11 months of carrying everything alone, failed to do it. Wednesday arrived the way the day before. A reckoning always arrives quietly, with the particular deceptive stillness of weather that is building toward something and hasn't shown its hand yet. Eleanor was at the store before 5 in the morning. She had slept 4 hours, which was more than Monday night and less than she needed, and she had woken with the clean, alert clarity of a person whose body understands that the margin for error has narrowed to nearly nothing. She made coffee. She reviewed every document in the satchel one final time, not because anything had changed, but because she needed to know them the way she knew the store's inventory completely without having to search. The territory investigator was arriving Thursday morning. Harmon's referral order had been filed Tuesday evening. Carl Briggs had, by Agnes Holt's account, presented himself at the land office Wednesday before noon to give a preliminary statement to Harold Peck, who was managing the office records with the careful, deliberate thoroughness of a man remaking his own record. These were the things that were in place. What was not in place was Gordon Dalton. He had not been seen at his store since Monday afternoon. His 2 men who had attempted the fence line on Tuesday had quietly left their boarding house Tuesday night without settling their accounts, which Caleb had discovered when he passed the house at 7 Wednesday morning and noted the absence of their horses. The store itself was open. A young man Eleanor didn't know was running the counter, but Dalton himself was absent, which was a specific kind of absence. Not the absence of a man who has left. The absence of a man who is somewhere nearby, doing something that has not yet become visible. Caleb said it plainly at 8 o'clock Wednesday morning, standing at Eleanor's counter with a cup of her coffee. He hasn't run. Rourke ran. Dalton doesn't run. He pivots. To what? Eleanor said. That's what I've been trying to figure out since yesterday evening. He set the cup down. He knows the injunction failed. He knows Harmon referred independently. He knows the investigator arrives tomorrow, and that the documentation you have is solid. All his official channels are closed. He paused. Which means whatever he does next, it won't be official. Eleanor looked at him directly. You think he'll try something with the property itself. I think he's a man who spent 8 months building toward a specific asset and watched it close in 3 days, Caleb said. Men like that don't accept that cleanly. The spring, Eleanor said. The spring, he confirmed. Not the fence line that failed, and he knows it. But if the source itself were damaged, contaminated, made legally disputed through some physical action that clouds the water rights assessment, then even if I keep the land, the value of what he was after is diminished, Eleanor said. She finished the thought as fast as he'd begun it, because she had been thinking about it too in the hours between 3 and 5 this morning, when sleep wouldn't come, and her mind kept circling the edges of what remained unresolved. And a disputed water source becomes a legal question that could take years to fully settle. Which is another form of winning, Caleb said. They looked at each other across the counter. Outside Red Valley was beginning its Wednesday, and the summer heat was already pressing against the walls of the store. And somewhere in this town, or just outside it, Gordon Dalton was making a calculation. "I need someone on that property tonight," Eleanor said. "I'll go," Caleb said. Immediate, no deliberation. "I'm coming with you," she said. Equally immediate. He looked at her. "Eleanor, it's my land," she said. Simply, finally, with the full weight of everything those 3 words contained. It was my father's land. That spring is the thing he spent 30 years protecting. If something happens out there tonight, I am not going to be in the store reading about it tomorrow morning. She held his gaze without blinking. "I'm coming." Howe was quiet for a moment. Reading her, the way he always read her, not looking for weakness, not looking for an angle, just looking at who she was and what she meant. He had been doing that since the first afternoon, and she had come to understand that being read that way fully, without judgment, without the constant undercurrent of assessment that she had lived with her entire life, was one of the most disorienting and quietly extraordinary things she had ever experienced. "All right," he said. "After dark. Bring the coat, it gets cold fast out there once the sun goes." "I know my own land, Mr. Walker," she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "Yes, ma'am, you surely do." The day moved. Agnes came at 10, with 3 additional written statements from townspeople who had observed Dalton and Rourke in private meetings. Statements she had apparently been collecting since Tuesday, with the organized, purposeful energy of a woman running a campaign. Eleanor added them to the satchel and thanked her, and meant it completely. Harold Peck sent a note at noon, confirming that Carl Briggs's preliminary statement had been formally recorded and witnessed. Clara Hayes, who was still at the hotel, sent a message saying that Victor had come to see her that morning, and that the conversation had lasted 2 hours, and she would tell Eleanor about it when she was ready, which Eleanor accepted because it was Clara's business and Clara's timeline. At 3 in the afternoon, Dalton's store closed early. The young man running the counter locked the door from inside and didn't come back out. At 4, one of Agnes's network. A woman named Ruth, who did laundry for half the town's businesses, came to Eleanor's back door with the information that she had overheard 2 men talking behind the feed store at noon. She had not recognized them. They were talking about a water test, about something called a mineral additive, about doing it tonight before the government man arrived. Eleanor felt the cold precision arrive instantly, completely. Mineral additive. Into the spring. To cloud the water rights assessment, to introduce enough chemical ambiguity to make the source legally contested to do in 12 hours what 8 months of fraud and official manipulation had failed to do. She took Ruth's hands between both of hers and said, "Thank you. Go home. Stay home tonight." Ruth looked at her with the steady, clear eyes of a woman who has decided whose side she's on. "You need anything else, you send for me." "I will," Eleanor said. She sent word to Caleb at the livery the moment Ruth left 3 words on a scrap of paper that said tonight. Spring. Confirmed. He was at the store in 8 minutes. They left at 9 after the last of the light was gone, and they rode Eleanor's 2 horses because she kept a second for deliveries, and because it was faster and quieter than any other means of covering the 2 miles to the back parcel. Eleanor rode in her working clothes, with the coat Caleb had reminded her of, and her father's rifle across the saddle, which she had not used in 2 years, but had cleaned and checked that afternoon, because if you are going to carry something, you carry it right. Caleb had his own rifle, and a lantern kept dark, and the survey stakes in a pack behind his saddle, and the particular silence of a man moving towards something with a purpose, and without wasted motion. They didn't speak on the road. They didn't need to. The property line came up in the dark, and Eleanor knew it by feel more than sight, the particular change in the ground, the way the grass grew differently near the fence line. The smell of the spring that her father had said could be detected from 50 yards if you knew what water smelled like, when it was clean and deep and genuinely alive. They stopped the horses at the fence and dismounted without sound. Caleb touched her arm once, not restraint, just communication, and pointed. 20 yards east of the spring access, there was a light. Lantern shielded, kept low but visible if you knew where to look. Two men. Eleanor could see the shapes of them moving with the focused, deliberate efficiency of people trying to work quickly and quietly. She looked at Caleb. He looked at her. She saw him make the calculation in real-time distance positions, what approach gave the least warning, and she made the same calculation alongside him because she was not a woman who stood behind someone else's decisions on her own land. "Left," she said very low. "I take the left. You take the position at the fence post." He looked at her for 1 second. Then, "Don't get within arm's reach of either of them." "I wasn't planning to," she said. She moved right. He moved to the fence post. She came around the long side of the spring fence with her rifle held level and her footfall silent on the summer grass, and she was within 20 feet of the nearer man when she said in a voice that carried exactly as far as it needed to, and no further, "Set it down, both of you." The men froze. The nearer one had a canister in his hands. Not large. The kind of thing that looked ordinary until you knew what it contained. The farther one turned and saw Caleb Walker at the fence post with a rifle and a lantern now lit, and his stance. The specific stillness of a man who has held weapons in serious circumstances and is doing so again without any alteration in his breathing. "Set the canister down," Eleanor said. "Slowly. On the ground. Step back from the spring." The nearer man looked at her. He looked at her rifle. He looked at her face. Whatever he had expected to find on the Whitmore property at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night, it was not this. "You're on private property," Eleanor said. "Conducting what appears to be deliberate contamination of a water source, which is a criminal offense under territorial law. You have the option of setting that canister down and waiting for the law to arrive, or you have the option of making this considerably worse for yourselves." She kept her voice level. "I would strongly suggest the first option." The canister went down. Slowly. On the ground. The man stepped back. The second man, with Caleb's position already established and unambiguous, raised both hands without being asked. Eleanor did not lower her rifle. "Caleb, rope." He had rope. Of course he had rope. He was a man who had been planning for the full range of eventualities since 9 o'clock this morning, and rope was a reasonable thing to bring. He secured both men to the fence post with professional efficiency, while Eleanor kept the rifle level and her feet planted on the ground that was hers. When it was done, she lowered the rifle. She walked to the canister and crouched down and looked at it without touching it. In the lantern light, she could read the label, partially. A chemical name she didn't recognize, but would have Caleb read fully and document in the morning. "This goes to the investigator," she said. "Agreed," Caleb said. She stood. She looked at the spring. In the lantern light, it looked exactly as it always had, the low fence her father had built. The clean ground around the access point, the particular quiet of water that has been in the earth a very long time. Still, undisturbed, intact. Something moved through her that was not quite tears and not quite relief, but was the combination of both in the specific form that arrives when something you have been afraid of losing turns out to be exactly where you left it. She pressed one hand flat against the fence post her father had set 30 years ago. "I've got you," she said quietly. Not to Caleb, not to the men tied to the fence, to the land, to the water, to the 30 years of her father's work and the 11 months of her own. "I've got you." Caleb was beside her. He didn't say anything. He simply stood there, and the lantern burned between them, and Red Valley was 2 miles away in the dark, and Thursday was 6 hours from arriving. She turned and looked at him. How was looking at her the way he had looked at her since the first afternoon, the way that had nothing to do with what she looked like, and everything to do with what she was. And she looked back at him the same way, because she had learned over 4 days that it was possible to be seen by a person without flinching, and that the not flinching changed something essential about the seeing. "What happens after Thursday?" she said. It wasn't a small question, and he didn't treat it like one. "Depends what you want to happen," he said. "I want the investigation to be thorough," she said. "I want Dalton prosecuted. I want Rourke found and held accountable. I want Harold Peck confirmed in the land office administrator position because he earned it." She paused. I want the store to run the way my father built it to run. I want to fix the sign above the door and the step with the crack in it. Another pause, smaller. And I want to know if the man standing next to me has somewhere he's supposed to be that isn't here. The question landed in the space between them and stayed there, real and plain and without decoration. Caleb Walker looked at her for a long moment. She was close enough to see his face clearly in the lantern light. The lines of it, the gray at the edges of his beard, the specific quality in his gray-blue eyes that was not distance, but its opposite. The quality of a man who has stopped moving. I haven't, he said, had somewhere to be, in a long time. And now, she said. Now, he said, and his voice was low and entirely without performance. I'm standing on the best watered land in the valley, with a woman who just talked two men into surrendering with one rifle and a very reasonable tone of voice. The corner of his mouth moved. Seems like a good place to be. Eleanor looked at him. Something warm and complicated was happening in her chest that she did not have precise words for, which was unusual for a woman who had words for most things. It was not simple. It was not the kind of warmth that arrives easily or asks nothing of the person who carries it. It was the kind that settles deep and stays. You should know, she said, that I am not a simple person to be near. I run a store and I keep my own accounts and I make my own decisions. And I have 11 months of anger about things that were done to this business that I intend to address fully and thoroughly before I'm done. I know, he said. And I'm not looking to be rescued, she said. That's not what this has been. That's not what I want it to be. I know that too, he said. I stopped trying to rescue things a long time ago. He paused, found the words with the careful honesty she had come to expect from him. I do well alongside things worth standing beside. The night was warm, and the lantern burned between them, and two men sat tied to her father's fence post, and Thursday was coming. Eleanor Whitmore looked at Caleb Walker and understood with the same clean clarity she brought to accounts and ledgers and legal documents that this man was exactly who he appeared to be. Not more, not less. Exactly. She had not met many people of whom that was true. Then stay, she said. For now, and we'll see what we're both worth over time. That's all I'd ask, he said. She nodded once. Then she turned back to the spring and the night and the work that remained, because there was always work that remained, and she had never once in her life left it undone. Thursday arrived on the 6 o'clock stage from Denver. The territory investigator's name was James Alderman. He was 53 years old and built like a man who had been arguing with mountains for most of his life and had won more arguments than he'd lost. He had a gray beard and a federal badge and a leather case that he carried with both hands because it was heavy, with the kind of paperwork that once opened tends to stay open for a long time. Eleanor met him at the stage office at 6:15 with the satchel over her shoulder and Caleb Walker beside her and Harold Peck behind them both with a bound file of land office records that he had spent Wednesday afternoon and most of Wednesday night organizing with a thoroughness that went well beyond what was strictly required, and which Eleanor suspected was Harold Peck's way of demonstrating in document form exactly who he had decided to be. Alderman shook Eleanor's hand. He shook it the same way Caleb had shaken it, fully directly, as between two people who are taking each other seriously. Miss Whitmore, he said. I've read the referral from Judge Harmon and the preliminary wire from Mr. Walker. I understand this situation has been developing for some time. 8 months officially, Eleanor said. Possibly longer. I'd like to start at the beginning, he said. Your documentation first, then the land office records, then witness statements. He looked at her steadily. I want you to know that what Harmon sent me is substantial. I'm not coming in skeptical. I appreciate that, Eleanor said. But I'd rather you come in thorough. Alderman almost smiled. I intend to be both. They spent Thursday in the land office conference room, a room Eleanor had never been invited into before, though she had passed its door 100 times with the documents spread across the table, and Alderman asking questions in the methodical, unhurried way of a man who has done this before and knows that the truth takes the time it takes. He interviewed Eleanor for 2 hours. He interviewed Harold Peck for 90 minutes. He interviewed Agnes Holt, whose network gathered statements he read with the focused attention of a man who recognizes organized intelligence when he sees it. He interviewed Carl Briggs, who arrived looking like a man surrendering something he'd been carrying too long, and who told the truth completely, and without omission, in the way Eleanor had advised him to. He looked at the canister from the spring which Caleb had wrapped and labeled and delivered to the stage office first thing Thursday morning with a note requesting chemical analysis. He looked at the survey stakes. He looked at Victor Hayes's ledger, which Clara had authorized Eleanor to present as evidence. Clara herself came at 4 in the afternoon. She came without Victor, and with a composure that had cost her something significant to assemble. She sat across from Alderman, and she told her account in the plain, precise voice of a woman who has decided that the truth is the only thing she has left that is entirely hers, and she did not look away from Alderman's questions, and she did not soften anything. Alderman closed his leather case at 5:30. He looked at Eleanor across the table and said, "Miss Whitmore, your father's extension filing was valid. The debt notice served against you on Friday was fraudulent. The original document's disappearance from the land office constitutes destruction of official records. The contract between Mr. Hayes and Mr. Dalton establishes a pattern of coordinated fraud against this office and against your property rights specifically." He paused. "Commissioner Rourke will be located. Mr. Dalton will be charged. The 2 men from Wednesday night are already in custody, and they have, as of this morning, both identified Gordon Dalton as the person who employed and instructed them." Eleanor heard each sentence land. She absorbed each one fully. "Your property," Alderman continued, "is not in default. Your water rights are intact, and the parcel behind your store is yours in full as it was your father's before you." The room was very quiet. Harold Peck made a sound that might have been a breath released from very deep. Agnes Holt, who had insisted on being present as a community witness and whom nobody had thought to argue with, sat with her hands folded and her expression showing exactly the particular satisfaction of a woman who has been right about something important. Caleb Walker was standing at the back of the room as he had been standing at the back of rooms all week, present steady, not requiring the center of anything. Eleanor did not need to turn around to know he was there. "Thank you, Mr. Alderman," she said. "Thank yourself," Alderman said. "And thank the people who had the courage to tell the truth." He looked around the table. All of them. Gordon Dalton was found in Pueblo the following Tuesday, attempting to file papers on a parcel of land near the Arkansas River. He was arrested before he could complete the filing. The territory court's proceedings took 4 months, during which Eleanor was called as a primary witness twice, and was present, composed, and exact both times. Rourke was found in Santa Fe. He cooperated fully with the prosecution in exchange for reduced charges, which was the decision of a man who had at some point between Red Valley and New Mexico run the numbers on his situation and found them unambiguous. Victor Hayes was charged as a co-conspirator. The proceedings against him were separate and handled by the county court, and Eleanor was not involved in them directly. Clara was. What Clara decided about her marriage in the months that followed was her own business, and she made those decisions with the particular deliberate quiet of a woman who has stopped performing a version of herself and has started simply being one. Dalton's store closed. A family from Kansas bought it the following spring and turned it into a hardware operation which suited the east end of Main Street better than it ever had. The sign above, Whitmore General Goods, was painted in October. New letters, dark green on cream, Gerald's original color scheme that Eleanor had found noted in his records. She painted it herself on a Sunday morning with Agnes Holt handing up the brushes and Caleb Walker on the ground making suggestions that she ignored because it was her sign and she knew exactly what she wanted it to say. The step was fixed in September. Caleb fixed it with a piece of oak he cut himself and set himself, and did not make any particular announcement, about which was how he did most things. He had not left Red Valley. He had taken the small house on the eastern edge of town, a renter's arrangement at first, then a purchase in November, when it became clear that the leaving wasn't coming. He worked. He was a man who knew how to do a great many things with his hands and with his knowledge, and Red Valley turned out to have considerable need of both. He helped Earl Morrow reorganize the livery accounts. He consulted on a water rights dispute between 2 ranch families in the neighboring county. He rode the territory twice on short assignments for the Federal Land Commission because Alderman had taken note of his usefulness and communicated that note upward. He came back both times. Eleanor had not asked him to, and had not pretended not to notice when he did. What grew between them grew slowly, the way things grow that are meant to last. Not the sudden consuming kind that burns bright and asks no questions. The kind that builds through shared mornings and difficult days, and the particular intimacy of two people who have seen each other at their least guarded, and have kept showing up anyway. He brought her coffee on Wednesday mornings, which became a habit without being discussed. She kept a second chair at the back table, which had been there since the first afternoon and had simply never been moved. They argued about accounts twice. She was right both times, and he conceded with the same straightforward honesty he brought to everything, and they agreed about most other things, which she suspected was because they had come to their convictions through similar roads and arrived at similar conclusions, which is rarer than most people admit. He told her one evening in December, with the store closed and the lamp lit and the first real cold of winter pressing at the windows, about his father's ranch. Not the summary version he had given her the first afternoon. The full the 40 years. The specific fields. The way his father had talked about the land. The particular grief of a man who had built something real and watched it taken. He told it steadily, and she listened the same way. And when he was done, she didn't offer consolation, because she understood that what he needed was not consolation, but witness. Someone to know the full weight of it. She knew the full weight of it. He held her hand while he talked, and she let him, and neither of them made anything complicated of the simplicity of it. In the spring April, a year and 2 months after the Friday, Carl Briggs walked into her store with a fraudulent debt notice. Eleanor stood at the back fence of the Whitmore property and looked at the spring her father had kept clean and fenced, and called the only thing in Red Valley that couldn't be argued with. The water was clear. It had been tested twice by the Territory Office and found entirely uncontaminated. The chemical canister from Wednesday night had contained a mineral compound that, had it reached the source, would have required years of remediation. It had not reached the source. The fence was intact. The iron survey stakes were documented and filed with the county record. The store was running, genuinely running, not surviving. 3 new accounts established in the fall. A supply contract with the new school district. Agnes Holt had sent 2 families her way in January, which Agnes had done without being asked, which was Agnes's way of saying something she would never say directly. Red Valley had not become a different town. It was still a place where people made judgments quickly and revised them slowly, where gossip ran faster than news and kindness arrived later than it should have. But it had changed in the specific way that places change when a thing happens publicly that cannot be unseen. When a woman who had been dismissed and diminished stands in the street and speaks the truth out loud, and the truth turns out to be larger and more consequential than anyone had assumed, and the people who had been watching from the side have to decide quietly and one by one what they make of what they saw. Most of them had decided something better than what they'd had before. Not all, but most. And most, Eleanor had concluded, was enough to work with. Caleb came to stand beside her at the fence. She heard his boots on the grass and did not turn around because she knew the sound of him now, the way she knew the sound of the store's front door and her own heartbeat, and the particular silence of this parcel of land at this hour of the morning. He stood beside her and looked at the spring. "Alderman sent a letter," he said. "Dalton's sentencing is next month. He wants you present for the statement." "I'll be there," she said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll come with you." She looked at the spring. The water moved the way it always moved, without hurry, without drama, emerging from the earth, the way things emerge when they have been there long enough to know they belong. "Caleb," she said. "Eleanor," he said. The way he said her name fully, without diminishment, as if the name itself was something worth saying correctly. She turned and looked at him. The morning light was on his face, and he was looking at her the way he had looked at her from the beginning, with the full, undivided attention of a man who has decided what he sees and is no longer deciding, but simply seeing. "My father used to say that the spring couldn't be argued with," she said. "He meant it was solid, real, the kind of thing that doesn't change based on what people say about it." Caleb nodded slowly. "I think some people are like that," she said. "Some things between people." She held his gaze. I think this is. He reached out and took her hand. Not tentatively. Not as a question. The way you take hold of something you have been sure of for a long time and are done pretending otherwise. Yes, he said. I think it is. They stood at her father's fence in the April morning, and the spring moved beneath the ground with its old, unhurried certainty, and the town of Red Valley went about its Wednesday behind them, and Eleanor Whitmore, who had been told she was too much, too heavy, too alone, too little, stood on the land that was hers, and felt the full, quiet, unargued weight of what she had always been. Not what they had called her. Not what 3 years of silence had almost made her believe. What she had always been, a woman who kept her father's books and fixed her own hinges and looked the truth in the face without flinching and carried what needed carrying, until the day someone worth standing beside walked through her door and saw exactly who she was. She had not needed saving. She had needed simply to be seen. And now she was. Fully. Finally. By this land which had always held her. By this town which was learning. By this man who had never once looked at her and found her wanting. And by herself, which she had come to understand, was where all of it had to begin. The spring ran clear. The morning held. Eleanor Whitmore held too.